Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is a game that needs no introduction, and the point of this video needs no introduction either. After like 8 years, everyone was expecting, a new game, so imagine our surprise when it was announced that this game was getting its track count doubled instead. It was a controversial decision, but luckily it was smooth sailing the whole time. I'm just kidding, it was a complete disaster. And as a certified Mario Kart fan since childhood, I've taken it upon myself to chronicle the entire thing in ranking form, putting all 96 tracks in the whole game in a list from worst to best, which is a strategy that has never caused any controversy ever, I don't think. As long as you don't hold me to my Wave 6 placement since it's still decently new, and don't vow to kill me because of some of my hotter takes, we should be all good. And I know what you're thinking, haven't a million other people made this exact same video? Yes, but the difference is, I'm making it longer. But let's not waste any more time and get straight into it. It seems smart to break such a long ranking into tiers of some kind, so let's start things off with F tier. Stop it, get some help. If you genuinely believe it's a good idea to pick one of these tracks, you're too far gone, and if they're your favorites, it might be easiest to just kill you right there. These are the tracks that are either painfully boring to play or just painfully painful, and I'd almost rather do nothing than play them. Starting off with number 96. Believe it or not, we're getting into some controversial ones immediately, and this might be one of the most controversial in the whole video. You ready? The worst track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is DK Summit. I feel like I have to clarify that I'm not actually kidding. DK Summit is by far the worst thing this game has to offer. I said earlier that F tiers are tracks that I'd almost rather do nothing than play. Almost? Yeah, this is the only track in the game where the entire thing is so miserable that I actually would rather sit in a room doing nothing than play it. I don't think I've had a single happy memory on this track ever. The entire gimmick is half pipes all the way down, and so if they mess that up, the track's pretty much screwed, and sure enough, not only are the half pipes bad, but they feel like they haven't even been play tested. It's so impossibly easy to approach one of these at the wrong angle and end up going backwards back up the mountain, the way you came. There should not be a track where that's possible, and also, could Lakitu wait any longer to fish you out of these pits? The combination of these two things makes it so incredibly tedious and difficult to regain any lead that you had, because once you've lost it, basically the only way you can get it back is by hoping that all of the computers fall off the face of the earth. Well, at least the track looks good, right? No! No, this track looks awful. It's just white. If you look at the background, you will see exactly, there's absolutely nothing there. Take away these tiny red fences and the Shy Guys, and there's no indication you're even snowboarding. It's just a desolate wasteland. There's genuinely zero that I like about this track, or even tolerate. I hate everything. Am I being biased? Sure, but do I care? Absolutely not. For some tracks in this game, I feel dread when I realize they're coming up next, but this is one step beyond that. This only makes me feel pure rage. It somehow manages to be both boring and infuriating at the same time. This is the Thumbelina of Mario Kart, and that's basically the most damning thing I can say, so I guess I've made my point, just ugh. This one is way less controversial. Excite Bike Arena is one of the only tracks in this game where it genuinely just feels like filler, and that's insane. Baby Park at least has the excuse of looking nice and having a cute theme and just being inherently chaotic, which by the way is the only reason why that track isn't going in the very next spot, but this one doesn't even have that. The road is this weird yellow color, and I know this was basically the only thing they had to go off of when making this track, but still, the theme isn't cute whatsoever. It's procedurally generated, which is a neat idea, but it doesn't really add anything to the track itself, and it certainly doesn't disguise the fact that it's just an oval. Even the music just feels kind of annoying, and there's pretty much no chaos here. Baby Park is a short and wide oval, so it's like there's space for everyone to line up next to each other. But this is long and thin, giving it the same problem as DK Summit, just not as bad, where if you fall behind, you kinda just need to get good items in time, because it's not the easiest to outdrive someone when you're both just driving in a straight line. I don't even feel that much dread when I play this one, and the next three I definitely dislike significantly more, but Excite Bike Arena just feels so objectively lazy that I can't really put it anywhere but here. So like I just said, these next three were all designed to make me feel depressed. DK Summit was below the barrel, but these ones here are the bottom of the barrel, and two of the three are incredibly controversial because I guess I want to lose all of my viewers immediately, so here goes. Piranha Plant Slide fills me with a sense of despair no other course in this game can quite match. Like sure, the layout is pretty decent, and I like the two parts with the different colored pipes, but that's basically it. The outside bit just looks like someone's backyard, and it's still the most visually pleasing part of the track, because the inside of these pipes looks so bleak and gray that I just can't be interested. But even worse, so many elements of the way this track was put together feel like they were particularly crafted just to ruin my life, mine specifically. When I said I like the layout of the track, I meant I think the anti-gravity part is kind of cool because they're kind of at an angle, and that was a sort of whatever change. But so many of these turns are just not fun to drive on. Pretty much any of these initial turns through the sewer, for example, because the parts of the track with the flowing water are so small that you never even know where you're gonna end up. And to make it even worse, then the floor opens up, and now there's floating platforms. You miss them, no biggie, so you go up the ramp, and the floor just disappears. Your momentum carries you through the air just the slightest amount, but now you have half a second before you fall to your death. And most of that half a second is you registering that there's a chasm there when you previously couldn't even see it. Sure, the glider part back up into the random field in the middle of... where is this exactly? It's kind of fun sometimes, but the rest of this track is just so painful to me that I can feel a not-so-small part of my soul die every time I remember that I just finished TikTok Clock, and now I have to endure this next. I don't get why no one talks about this. Whatever. The next one, everyone does talk about. If you've been around for the last 2 years, you've probably at least heard about the city tracks from Mario Kart Tour being added into 8 Deluxe with the Booster Course Pass. It was the whole justification for it existing, actually. You may also have heard that a lot of them are really bad. Not so much at the end, but let me tell you, at the start of this last year, people were letting Nintendo have it, and rightfully so, because so many, not just city tracks, but tracks, were just copy and pastes from Tour, especially graphically, and I'm pretty convinced that the only reason they even bothered to change the later waves is because of the outcry. But we'll get to all that later. So which one is the worst city track of all? It's London Loop. It's not even close. I'm kind of shocked I put this so low, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the dread I feel when booting up Piranha Plant Slide is almost exactly the same feeling I get when booting up London Loop. And I know exactly why, because I still don't know where I'm going. Let's dive deep into the theoretical physics of what a city track exactly is. If you think about it, they're actually kind of sectional tracks like Mount Wario, but all of the sections are just laid on top of each other. I don't think anyone will argue with me that one of the things that makes Mount Wario so special is the sheer variety of places we get to see. It's not, oh look, another random hill, great. It's, whoa, am I in a cave now? That's so cool. And it also helps that it's pretty easy to figure out where you're actually going just by looking at the minimap because it's a relatively straight line, and you can probably figure out where I'm going with this. A lot of city tracks actually get this pretty well. Some tracks are kind of weird for figuring out where to go but have a lot of variety. Some tracks are slightly less varied but you can usually tell where you have to go, and some tracks do both. And some tracks do neither. Yep, London Loop is one of those. In fact, it fails the hardest by far. Literally every single one of these turns looks exactly the same. There are either 1 or 2 spots that are just grass and chain jumps. There's 1 spot by a drawbridge. There's 1 part by a river. Anywhere between 1 and 3 spots are at a town square or something. And the rest are just houses. They're just roads. If you're wondering why I said 1 to 3, 1 to 2 of all these different places, it's because I seriously don't know. From the start of the race to the end, I can never tell where the hell I am, or what comes next, or where I need to go. And that doesn't help the fact that this track is notoriously difficult to navigate. Well, I'll just pull up my mini-map and... How the hell am I supposed to drive in these conditions? Well, that's the neat part. You don't. The course is just so cramped that I don't have any room to breathe, and literally every single time I race on it, I think the end is just around the corner, only to realize I have like 3 more turns. Every road looks the same, so I just have no way of knowing when it's done. I know it isn't really this game's fault that all of the variations from Tour look like this, but I don't really care, because I'm not ranking how good of an adaptation this is. I'm ranking how good of a course this is, compared to other courses from this game, how much I like it. And not only does this fail to be a city track, but it also just fails to be a track. It's just unplayable. It's the magnum opus of Mario Kart Tour, the worst Mario Kart game in recent memory. Depending on how recent, it might only have one other one for competition though. The more I think about it, the more I realize that this track really does deserve the 4th from last spot. London Loop has truly earned this title. Congratulations. Okay, this one might actually be the most controversial on the entire list, but I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry, but I can't stand Waluigi Pinball. I honestly feel miserable every time I play this track, and I'm half convinced that the only reason people like it at all is because they're blinded by nostalgia and the fact that the idea of racing in a pinball machine is cool. And I guess it is, but the more you think about it, the more you realize that it's actually not cool. It's creative. There's a difference. I just don't think that these narrow, winding roads where you can barely see anything really lend themselves to compelling track design. Think about it. Doesn't the argument that the pinball machine looks cool kind of fall apart when you think about the fact that 80% of the entire track is narrow, twisty paths where the only thing to look at is the color of the floor? To be fair, the actual pinball table part looks pretty cool, and also the spinny warp tunnel, I actually like that part a lot, but I'm sorry to say that I can't really enjoy any of that either, because I'm always paranoid that a giant metal ball is going to compress me into an inch-tall pancake of my former self. I really hate these pinballs, because there's so little you can do to avoid them, and don't say that they add challenge, because I hate when people say that in response to things that are just plain unfair. It's the equivalent of saying that it builds character. Challenge implies that you just need to practice a bit more and get a little bit better at the game so you can adequately avoid an obstacle, and that type of challenge I don't have any problem with, but sometimes it's just straight up impossible to avoid these. These roads are so narrow, like I already said, and if there are any other people around you, especially if they have an item behind them, there just might not be anywhere to go. And on the pinball table, it's honestly even worse, because even though it looks nicer and the giant Waluigi is kinda cool, the pinballs are just bouncing around so much that even if you're looking backwards constantly, something could just still smack you from the side, and there's legitimately zero you can do. And it's right before the end, so you're just doomed. And who even wants to be looking backwards the whole race anyway? It's just not fun. They couldn't even be bothered to make an original song for this track. They just used the same version from Wario Stadium. Is it too much to ask for an actual remix of the song when literally every other track in the whole game has its own song? Even Excitebike has its own song. Waluigi Pinball just pisses me off, man. At least there are none for the rest of the game that make me as mad as this. Upper F tier starts now. Yeah, Baby Park still isn't that good though. I mean, the background is really awesome, and I think putting this in the middle of a baby amusement park is creative and cool. The music pretty much perfectly represents the chaos that this track is trying to be, and all of the colors just add to that too. Even making it 7 laps instead of 3 is trying to make this track just as insane as possible. So why is it still so low? Because it doesn't work. Double Dash had the big bananas and the Bowser shells, and because of that, I don't really think any version of this track is gonna be as chaotic. Like, there are some races where I end up getting 8th place last second, which is more annoying than it is chaotic anyway, but most of the time I just stay in first the whole time, holding the same green shell behind my back for the entire race. And if the entire gimmick of the track doesn't really work as well as it could, what does this track have? A giant circle? I don't really have anything against Baby Park, and I'm fine with playing it just to be bombarded with some bright colors, but I still think it's kind of just a bad track nonetheless, and I usually end up being bored by like the 4th lap. And that's kind of what sums up Upper F tier. Boredom. Mario Circuit 3 is a pretty good example of that, actually. I mean, look at it. It's like the flattest track in the whole game. The color of the sand doesn't really look good at all, and I'm not really a fan of this limbo land sort of aesthetic. You know what I mean? It doesn't even look like part of this world. In the original, the sand was like light brown, so why did they keep making it like yellow? The background being green makes up for it a bit, and I like that there are little Super Mario blocks around the perimeter, but it still looks pretty bad, and it doesn't exactly help that this is a Wave 2 track and the graphics are pretty lazy still, but play-wise, this isn't actually as bad as you would think. Some of these turns are straight up nightmare fuel, especially on 200cc, but it kind of makes up for it with the sheer amount of shortcuts that are possible on this track, and everyone hates on the music, but I actually kind of like it. It's still a bad track, obviously, and I'm usually not having the most fun while playing it, and if this is your favorite track in the whole game, you need to be arrested. But it isn't like the worst thing I've ever seen. Back to a controversial one, SNES Rainbow Road is a failure in every imaginable way, except visually and graphically. It actually looks pretty nice. But that doesn't really change the fact that this isn't really a Rainbow Road to me. The way I see it, there are 2 ways to approach making a Rainbow Road. Either you can make it the most complicated and difficult final gauntlet known to man, or you can make it pretty easy and just happy. Honestly, I kind of prefer it the second way, because the entirety of the cup before that is the final gauntlet. You've already beaten that, as well as all of the other cups. Now is the time to celebrate and reminisce about all of your memories playing the game, which seems fitting for the last course in the entire thing. They're harder to bring back as retro tracks, but they still work. Problem is, SNES Rainbow Road is neither of those. It's not a final gauntlet, and even if it was at the end of the game, it still wouldn't really have any emotional impact to me at all. This track is just driving around in the shape of the letter C. Most of the turns are just turns, and ever so often they throw in a random ramp which just messes up the angle of your cart if anything, and hurts more than it helps. The glowy thwomps that make the road ripple are kinda cool, but they don't really present any sort of challenge. Most of my not first placements are just from getting Mario Karted, which is way too easy to do. Even the music is middle of the road and fails to elicit any sort of feeling from me. I just can't be interested in this track. It's a good thing it looks good, because in a track with nothing else going for it, it needs to be visually and graphically pleasing, or else there's nothing that it has going for it at all. and I cannot stress this point enough now, because in the tracks to come, we're going to see quite a few that fail at this absolutely miserably. I think Sky High Sunday is the second jankiest track in this entire game. There's something especially intriguing about how a perfectly flat surface that you can trick off of twice, railings with no hitboxes that spin you around, sections where you have to drift and trick off of stairs at the same time, causing you to fall off the inside edge 9 times out of 10, and sections where you have to blindly trick off a ledge but the camera is so badly positioned that you can't even tell where you're going to end up, all made it through to the actual game. It's truly impressive how bad this track is at being a track. And realistically, it might even be worse than DK Summit, although I can't truly make myself believe that, but I still can't really be that mad at it. I mean, it's still an F tier because, oh my god, this can get really painful, but it's also a pretty fun track at the end of the day. It might not look the best graphically speaking, but visually, it's got some of my favorite color choices in the entire game. Blue, pink, and purple are just objectively the best colors, and a lot of the track just looks appealing, regardless of how smooth and detailless parts of it can be. And this course has a really great theme and sticks with it. Ice Cream in the Sky is pretty interesting, and there are a lot of cool things you can do with that. And they do. The bottom half is lined with gift shops, then you drive through a giant bounce house. In the background you can see various parts of the Ice Cream Kingdom, and the finish line is in a cafe inside a freezer. A lot of this stuff I didn't even notice until I started actively looking for it, because it kind of forces me to pay attention to not dying a horrible death rather than the nice looking scenery, but it's still there, and that's gotta count for something, right? And the music is nice and cheery too. The truth is, I really don't hate this track that much at all, and it isn't even too disappointing to me that it's such a magnificent disaster that had the potential to be a genuinely good new track. It's just Sky High Sunday, and it's just whatever. Toad's Turnpike. Now this is the OG bad track. Some people swear by Excite Bike Arena and Baby Park, and with ones like Piranha Plant Slide, not liking them is actually considered weird, which is obviously wrong, but whatever. But pretty much everyone thinks that Toad's Turnpike kinda sucks balls, and everyone would be absolutely right. The layout is just a figure 8, which Nitro Mario Circuit did 1,000 times better, and the road is so wide that sometimes you actually have to try to hit the cars. I mean, I'll hit the cars anyway because I suck at the game, but still. I mean, I like the cars with gliders on them, but there's so few good opportunities to use them because it seems like the entire course is either right before a painfully long turn or during a painfully long turn. The fact that the track is so boring and samey throughout that they had to put the coins literally 5 in a row on the far edges is kind of a big tell. And what kind of anti-gravity is this? I like that they tried to make it more interesting, but not every retro track has or needs anti-gravity. This doesn't need to be here. What is this? What is this meant to be? They could have brought back DK Jungle Parkway, but they brought back this instead. And that's just kinda dumb. Toad Circuit is the track that single-handedly sabotaged the entire Booster Course Pass. Because look at it. This thing looks so ugly. Complain all you want about the lack of foliage on, like, Koopa Cape, but if you look back at this, I promise you will laugh. This course is such a graphical downgrade from everything else in this entire game that it managed to make basically everyone lose faith in any quality this DLC might have had. And this isn't the only track with this problem, obviously. Compare the road on Shy Guy Falls to the rocks on Rock Rock Mountain. Compare the grass on Yoshi Circuit to the grass on Rock Rock Mountain. Compare the trees on Royal Raceway to the trees on Rock Rock Mountain. I know I'm bullying Rock Rock Mountain here a lot, but you get the idea. Even though this track is probably the worst graphically, that doesn't make it any less bad while it's here. This grass looks like a combination of concrete and like fondant, neither of which are remotely close to grass or edible, no matter what the people on TV try to tell you. It's literally Play-Doh. Don't put that inside your body. Anyway, it isn't actually how bad this track looks that makes me dislike it so thoroughly. It's the fact that it has literally nothing else. If you have a track that looks like absolute garbage but has a decent layout and is sort of creative, then I don't really have a problem with that. And if you have a track that's pretty basic but looks really good, I still won't have a problem with that. But remember what I said about Rainbow Road? A track with nothing else going for it needs to look good, otherwise it has literally nothing. This track has literally nothing. It's still above Rainbow Road, and I don't really know why, but like, if Toad Circuit had base 8 graphics, people would still make comments about how it's a bad choice for the first non-city track in the whole DLC, which it is. It's a terrible choice, but the amount of overall backlash would probably be way less, because then the track would have something about it. But outside of some vaguely recognizable synthy music, this track is just utter boredom from start to finish. You'll be happy to know that Toad Circuit is the last track in the game that actually makes me feel quite like that. Yep, we're moving on to D tier, kind of bleh. I'm not so much bored when playing these as I am kind of passive. I'm still enjoying myself. This is a pretty solid game in general, and there are honestly very few tracks that I actually don't like, but I'm not really into it, you know? There are less of these though, starting with New York Minute. And the only reason it isn't an F tier is because it's already over before I have the chance to be bored. I know what the track is called, but that doesn't mean it has to literally be beatable in under 60 seconds, and the only reason this isn't worse than London Loop is for that exact reason. I can in fact actually tell where I'm going, because I'm given no time to get lost. And unsurprisingly, that means that the places I'm going aren't very interesting. Think of all of the cool landmarks around New York City. It's New York City, Rockefeller Center, the Empire State Building, like 80,000 different museums. The only place in this map that I can actually sort of recognize is Times Square, and I'm not even 100% sure that that's what this is. This track consists of a park and 2 roads, and one of them has buses, and one of them doesn't. And that's it. In the whole track, every building is so small, and even though the nighttime aesthetic isn't an inherently bad idea, I really do not like the execution of it. Every single building is a perfectly flat black surface with some colored squares, which to be honest, isn't the worst depiction of New York City I've ever seen, but it's also not good. And to make things worse, half of the entire track, which technically is only like 30 seconds, takes place in Central Park, or like, a park. And this place is a pretty good representation of what this track is like in general. It looks graphically and visually terrible, and it's absolutely miserable and uninteresting. I don't think there's a single turn in this area that feels good to drive around, and there are basically no details at all here. Do you know what Central Park looks like? Do you know what parks look like? This is just a perfectly bland brown road with perfectly smooth green concrete on both sides. It's so terrible that the second best part is this bland parking garage thing with a red carpet down the middle, which is saying something because I don't even really know what this is meant to be. The best part is the music, in case you were wondering. I like the saxophone solo and I like the jazzy feel, and it's the only part of this entire prototype of a track that feels anything remotely like what it was based on. One time I played on this course and realized that the most pleasing looking part was the puddles on the ground, and that is a hilarious fact that has never left my mind. Bone Dry Dunes is the worst Nitro track in the base game, and I don't think I'm really hurting anyone's feelings by saying that. There's not even much for me to say. The theme isn't awful, and I like that they tried to make a desert track orange instead of yellow for once. I like the ship with the toads that flings coins onto the track. I like the little merchant stalls, and I like that the entrance to this cave is a giant dry Bowser skull. Even the piranha plants are skeletons, and I think that's pretty cool. Honestly, the vibe of this track is pretty on point, but the reason it's this low is because of how unplayable it is. I don't care that this is a Special Cup track and that it's meant to be difficult. These roads are so wavy that I'm honestly kind of appalled that they managed to make it into the game. Even some normal turns are just way too tight to make consistently, especially on 200cc, and this is definitely the most apparent in this cave. I don't think there's ever been a time I've played on this track where I've successfully drifted at the right angle on this turn 3 out of 3 times, because there's just no way to predict it, because you keep bouncing up and down on these random sand dunes. You want an example of actually productive challenges? Every other course in the Special Cup. And even though you technically could grind this track for a million years and become an expert at it, is that really in the spirit of the game? If a track is so difficult and so annoying for you that you feel the need to repeat playing it over and over and over just so you can try your best to have an iota of fun on it, that's not really good track design, is it? Sky Garden is so unfinished that it's kinda funny, but there's still some sort of charm to it that you can't help but appreciate, just nowhere near as much as there could have been if they actually bothered to make this track look good. Like, not only did they fail to make this look graphically nice, but they also failed to make this visually nice. I don't think the color change from blue and Super Circuit to gray and DS was that huge of a downgrade, but this? I was always under the impression that the absolutely disgusting choice to switch to orange tiles was made by the Mario Kart Tour team, but I never realized that it still had gray tiles there too. This choice was an original idea for this game, for Wave 1 of the Booster Course Pass. If I ask you to name one thing about Wave 1 of the Booster Course Pass, you'll probably say how it looks terrible. So why did they decide to try and make some ambitious change here? It looks awful, and the sand and the grass on the edges look even worse. Even the beanstalks don't have any details. It's called Sky Garden. Garden. Remember that other track with a garden in the sky that looked actually good? Now look at this again. but despite all that, I don't actually think this track is awful. I mean, all of those stupid choices pretty much halved what this course could have been and should have been, but there's still plenty of things to like about it. I think the layout is pretty good, except for this one part where you have to make the sharpest left turn ever right after a mushroom, and your momentum from it gives you basically no time. But I mean, they still added the mushroom, and there's also this glider ramp, and both of those are things. Gotta love things. Honestly, my favorite part of this track is the music, and I don't know why no one else talks about this part. From the very first time I heard it, I could hear nothing but Rocket Man.
And I think it's gonna be a long, long time.
They're not identical pieces of music, but you can't tell me that they aren't basically the same thing. And to prove this, a while back I actually transposed Rocket Man into A major from B flat major so that they were in the same key, and literally the only difference other than the beginning part is the fact that the end part on Sky Garden is just playing the same exact notes but in a different rhythm. Anyway, I don't know why I'm elaborating on this so much. The track's dumb and it looks like crap, and I like the music because it's funny, and that's about it. Water Park is the second track in the whole game, and ironically, it's also a pretty good midpoint between the tracks that are and aren't a failure. If you make a track that's worse than Water Park, sorry, but you kinda blew it, and there are a whole bunch of other courses I'd rather play. But if you make a track that's better than Water Park, I'd say you did your job somewhat correctly. And the reason I say that this is the midpoint between tracks that do and don't work is because I can't really decide if this track's execution of its theme does or doesn't work. I mean, I don't like it, but I can't really decide if there's any way that this should have been the end result of a track with, honestly, a pretty freeing idea. Think of all of the cool stuff you could do with a water park themed track. Well, you don't have to, because all of these cool rides in the background that we don't get to explore do the job for you. Imagine making a track based off of a water park, and the only things you do are drive past one of these cupcake rides and go in a giant circle up in the air. Neither of these things are actually part of water parks. This giant circle thing isn't even a part of real life. What is this? What is this meant to be? What is the purpose of... I mean, it looks pretty nice, and I like that we drive past a Ferris wheel, and I actually think the music is pretty catchy, but at the end of the day, this is a course about a water park, and part of it is flooded, because I guess no one who made this track has ever actually been to a water park, and that kinda sums up the most average track in the entire game. Blue Lake is when I first noticed Mario Kart's obsession with making tracks that are laid out in the shape of big bubble letters. SNES Rainbow Road was a C, Mario Circuit 3 was a K, this one is an R. I'm not insane, am I? And this one is the most absurd. I mean, R isn't the simplest letter. It feels like they're doing it on purpose now. Anyway, I have basically nothing to say on this track. It's a pretty good adaptation, but it's not really a very good course, is it? I mean, in Super Circuit, there were neither booze nor lake, so the fact that not only is there a lake, but a lake we can go into is kinda crazy. This is also when everyone started noticing how much effort they put into the retro tracks from this game and this game only, and continued to do so even into the DLC. I mean, I'm really glad they decided to put anti-gravity and water sections in this track, because without them, this would have been so much more boring, but why this track? This is the only track in the whole first half of the Booster Course Pass with anti-gravity, and you just have to ask yourself, why this one? To be fair though, it's not like all of their efforts went to waste. Blue Lake definitely delivers on its theme. The music is spooky, the area is spooky, it actually is what it says on the title now, and the new stuff breaks it up pretty well. But at the same time, I mean, it's just Blue Lake. No matter how well the theme was executed, it was never really going to be one of my favorites. It's just there. It's been a hot minute since we've had a controversial take, so let's change that. Okay, so I don't think Waluigi Stadium is bad, but I really don't think it's that good either. I think people were getting too greedy about the fact that Wave 4 was great, except for that one bad track, and so then they insisted that this one was just as good. But I hate to be the bearer of medium news, but this is really not anything special. It just feels like a more timid version of Wario Stadium. The colors are worse, the music is worse, the actual obstacles are worse, it's just all slightly worse. A lot of the turns just don't feel good to drive around, and even though there are a couple of mildly satisfying trick spots, that's really all there is. I like the robotic piranha plants, and I guess they had a bit of a challenge, but that's being kinda generous. I just like that they're there. I like to use the alternate routes that you can only get to by using the half-pipes, and I think that's a cool idea, although I don't actually use the half-pipes beyond that, and I'm pretty sure they actually slow you down. I really tried to for a little bit. The physics seriously just do not work in your favor 9 times out of 10, and so I just kinda gave up. You can really tell the half-pipes were just not designed for this game. And the mud texture is kind of bad, but I really hate to say that, because the fact that they put in details at all is miraculous, but still, it looks way too wet, and I know that that's what mud is, but it still just looks way too shiny. It looks like the water isn't even mixed in. Like, it's not a bad track, obviously, and it's got some neat ideas, but a lot of the time I'm just too focused on staying on the road and can't really immerse myself in the Waluigi poop, which is integral to the core values of the course and the psychological and analytical aspects of it. Therefore, it is terrible, and I'm giving it 0 stars on Yelp. I guess I can understand why so many people think Rosalina's Ice World is, like, so charming, but I just don't see it. Some of it probably is because of how new it is, but even still, I don't think it's super great. A lot of the turns just kind of suck, and it makes it really not enjoyable to drive on a lot of the time. This first super long turn on this thin road is so annoying, and if you're not perfectly balanced on the edge the whole time as Thanos intended, the camera just kind of gives up and you can't see anything and you plummet into the abyss. And then right after that is this super tight turn, which isn't exactly made easier by going into it completely blind. There's actually one part of the layout that I really like, and that's this frozen pond section. For one, I think the underwater section is seriously pretty and has a ton of nice colors, and I like how the ice layer above can be accessed just by tricking on lap 1, but then some ice at the front breaks, and then for the following 2 laps you have to use the speed from the half pipes to take the faster route. It's a pretty cool idea, no pun intended, that makes this area a little more dynamic, and if the area after this wasn't just blank walls, it might have even raised this track a few spots in the ranking. And that's another issue I have with this track. It's just too blue, damn it. That's an issue I've never had with anything before, but I don't think recency bias is skewing my opinion on this one. I honestly think this track is just too blue. I hate to say it, but my favorite part of the whole course is this little town area that we see for like 10 seconds at the finish line, and I'm tempted to think it's because it's the only area that has colors other than blue. Why couldn't the track have been focused on this area? Because except for one other section, the entire thing is just kind of boring to me. And I'm not really the hugest fan of the music either. I mean, I feel like I could get used to it, but like, okay, so here's the sheet music. There's this part where at the start of the triplet, it's a D sharp, but then after that, there's a D natural, and it just makes the end part of that main melody seem kind of like too dissonant for me. It almost feels like they hit a wrong note, and it feels like it's meant to be relaxing, and I think it probably could be, because I heard this music box version on YouTube, and I thought it was pretty decent, but then they put like a sort of exciting background track behind it, and basically what I'm trying to say is, the music felt kind of too weird. The whole track feels kind of weird, I don't know, but it's still pretty new, so maybe in like 5 seconds I'll love it, but like, I don't think so. Twisted Mansion might seem cool at first glance, but the more you think about it, the worse things get. Think of all the cool stuff you could put in a haunted house track, and think about how they didn't do a single one of those things you just thought of. We start things off with the best part, where we drive on the walls. That's cool. It's twisty and spooky, and mansion. Then we turn a corner and drive through this giant mouth into a sewer. Yep, this is what the rest of the track is. Not only is this not remotely haunted house related, and not only is this barely in a mansion, but it's not even twisty. We're driving on a wall, technically, but can you even tell? If you're standing in a cube, and I tell you that you're standing on the ceiling and you're just in low gravity, are you gonna be like, wow, this is so cool? No, of course not. You're gonna say, wow, I sure am on the side of a f***ing square. What possessed you to make half a track called Twisted Mansion a literal drain pipe? This is one of the most brain-dead things in this whole game. Anyway, then we glide over a spooky courtyard, drive through a normal mansion with one of the most hideously obscene turns this game has to offer, and then we drive through a graveyard with these statues that try to smash us. The most insulting part of this is the fact that there are parts of this that do work. I like the first section, I like the courtyard, I like the cemetery. There are multiple points where this course looks us in the eye and says, hello, we are indeed trying to be a haunted house track, and we are indeed trying to commit to a gimmick of twisty things. And with anti-gravity, that could have been really cool, but you can't then do this. I don't even really have anything to say. This is just so obvious in how and why it's just not really good that I have nothing to do here. It's just kind of a bummer. I mean, hey, for the first city track quote-unquote adapted for this game, Paris Promenade could have been worse. Could have been a lot better, but it could have been worse. I think they dodged a bullet by not making things confusing right off the bat. Having things basically be the same route all 3 times, but the third lap you just go around a different way that loops around and lets you take the whole thing backwards is actually pretty cool, and the fact that things split into 2 paths helps too. But I do think that if they went straight to all 3 laps being different, it might not have been the best. But that's not to say that this track is like good. It's so yellow, and I really don't know why, and a lot of stuff is just so barren and soulless, and I could make a joke about the French here, but, like, it still doesn't make the track very good. Like, the area under the Eiffel Tower, which kind of just looks like a hurricane just blew through, I don't know, maybe it looks like this in real life, but still, not the best for good track design, and I don't even know what this other path is supposed to be. And honestly, this track is pretty cramped too, and that's just not something I'm a fan of. But it's got a pretty intuitive layout, and I actually like the music. I know I'm meant to be laying out its criticisms at the moment, but I don't know, it's actually kind of fine. It's not like good, but I don't really mind that much. We're getting to the point where the positives really start to outweigh the negatives, and I start genuinely liking the tracks, and you know what that means? Yes, it means a new tier. It's time for C tier, mid. This was the hardest tier to rank by far, because I do actually like all of these quite a bit, even though they're pretty low on the list. Like I've said before, this is just an overall good game, and so when I knew that I liked them, it made me initially put them higher before eventually deciding that they weren't as good as the others, and I went through this process with basically all of them. It's the defining feature of this tier, so I guess that means they're all about the same. Starting with the other Wave 1 city track, actually. Tokyo Blur and Paris Promenade are apparently about the same for me. Tokyo just has that little bit of an extra edge. Every big issue I have with Paris is mostly fixed here, to be honest. For one, it just looks way nicer, and I know people always comment about how terrible it looks and how could Nintendo care so little about a course based off of Tokyo, and like, graphically it's obviously not the greatest, but as I've said before, this track has enough other stuff going on that I don't really care, and it's not like it looks visually bad, it actually looks pretty good. I love the reds and blues, and everything is so much more open. The 3 city tracks we've done so far have all been pretty cramped, so when I say I prefer ones that are more open, this is what I mean. I just have more room to breathe and admire things, and there is actually a lot to admire. It's really unfair to say that Nintendo put no effort into this track when every single building in the background is an actual building in Tokyo. There are videos on YouTube that I encourage you to watch that stop every 5 seconds and point to a building and say, yep, that's a real building, and here's what it's called. Yep, that's a real building. Here's what it's called. And there's so many just like that. And the track layout is pretty great too. Honestly, I think this is one of the better layouts for a city course. All 3 laps start the same way, but then there's a fork in the road. Lap 1 you go down the left, laps 2 and 3 you go down the right. And on lap 2 you meet back up with the later part of lap 1, so now you're familiar with that right path. And so on lap 3 you go back that way and take the right path again, but on a second fork, which in a way kind of connects back to the main stretch too. And I think the idea of gliding over the finish line from a separate route above the old one is really cool. Like, this isn't the best thing in the world, and the music comparatively kind of sucks, but this is definitely one of the most overhated tracks in the whole game. Just like how people got swept up in Wave 4 fever and started insisting that Waluigi Stadium was actually good, I think people got swept up in Wave 1 fever and started insisting that Tokyo Blur was actually bad. But looking back, it's actually pretty good. It's really not that bad at all. Just because it and Paris Promenade are kind of next to each other doesn't mean they're the same quality. The gap in tier does actually make quite a difference. I can play this track anytime and have a jolly old experience. Cloud Top Cruise is just another situation of a misused theme, but it has enough that I like that puts it this high. Honestly, I like most of this track. Driving on beanstalks, driving on clouds, driving on airships, that's all part of a cohesive theme, and a really good one. I love the first half of this track, and it has one of the best songs in the whole game. I loved this music before I knew it was a remix of Gusty Garden Galaxy, and I still love it now that I do know that. It's just great. But then the second half of the track is a lightning tunnel, and all of a sudden I don't like it anymore. I don't know, I've just never really been a fan of this area. The idea of lightning striking the speed boosts is cool and all, but they're pretty easy to avoid, and so it's essentially just a long gray stretch of nothingness with basically no challenge. And beyond the vague connection of lightning comes from clouds and this is a cloud track, there's really no reason for this to be here. Feels like they could have done something way better? Again, I don't have much to say. This honestly could have been an A-tier track, but in its current state, I can't really bring myself to feel any strong emotions toward it, except for the music. I have strong emotions toward that. I will listen to the music anytime. Rock Mountain is a really okay execution of a really okay idea, and I think it's really okay. At its most basic level, the idea is that the first half is going down, and then the second half is going back up, but they do a lot of cool stuff with that, like how instead of driving down, you glide down. The fact that the whole first part of this track is just 2 gliders where you fly through a forest and under fallen trees is something that isn't really seen anywhere else in this game, and I like it a lot. And going back up is made slightly more interesting by throwing in speed boosts and rolling boulders that you have to dodge. Even the glider at the very end lets you go over the finish line and skip a whole section of the track and land on a way later part. That's all really cool, but I have one issue with it. Normally, the way things look only matters to me in more basic tracks for all of the reasons I've said before. When you have less stuff going on, the stuff that's there is more necessary to get right. But even though this course has plenty going on that I like, it looks so bad that it defies all logic. I don't really need to explain how bad it looks graphically, but I'm going to anyway. The walls are so flat that it's hilarious. They're practically just a bunch of polygons with slightly different colors to show some level of, depth. But it doesn't work, and the foliage is even worse. The grass kinda, but mainly the trees. These trees look so terrible, and this is honestly the case for the whole Booster Course Pass. Actually, I'm just gonna use this as an opportunity to complain about the trees. Look at these trees on GBA Mario Circuit, or these trees on Royal Raceway, or literally any of Cheap Cheap Beach. The trees have leaves like trees do, but these trees just look like Play-Doh. Sometimes they add texture to the Play-Doh, but that doesn't mean they have leaves. It's not even like you have to remake the tree designs. You already have them in this exact game. Just port them over. Porting things over from other places is the only thing you guys have been doing. Just give me my trees! And not only does it look graphically terrible, but it looks visually terrible. I didn't even realize for the longest time that in Mario Kart 7, the mountains were just straight up a different color. Not only are these less detailed than the ones from 2011, but they're also just totally different mountains. Look how much better this view was in the original, back when it actually looked like you were flying over mountains. The view now isn't bad, but now who am I kidding? It's bad. Rock Mountain looks like poodoo, and I'm tired of pretending it doesn't. Most tracks in C tier ended up here because I originally put them higher and decided that they weren't actually that good. Coconut Mall is the opposite. For the longest time, I absolutely hated this track, and acknowledging that in reality it's not that bad is one of the hardest concessions I've ever had to make. I mean, I'm not gonna put it in second place like Nathaniel Bandy, but I have to admit, it isn't the worst thing in this game, but it's not like I hated it for no reason. This course has pretty much everything that people have been making fun of the Booster Course Pass for, and it shows. Starting off with the most basic and the most obvious, their graphics are real bad. The outside of the mall looks so awful, and the inside isn't much better, except for the decorations on the walls on these turns that look like Toast Arena from Odyssey, which is cool. Pretty much every asset that they placed inside of this mall looks like an asset and nothing more. Remember in the Wii version when not really being able to tell which escalator was going the right way until you got close, forcing you to make a quick decision added a little bit of challenge? And remember when in 7 they added really faded arrows to make it a bit easier, but they still looked like escalators? I mean, I don't remember either of those things because I've never played either of those games, but, you remember, and you know where I'm going with this. What is this? The only thing worse than these escalators is the turn immediately after that you have no time to make because the momentum from your trick jump has already smashed you straight through the wall into Sand Kingdom. And that's my other problem with this track. It feels so janky. Sky High Sundae is probably obviously worse, and DK Summit I just can't even get into again. But this, it's pretty bad, man. Trying to get on and off of these green roads successfully is one of the most unpleasant parts of this whole game, and it's not like that's it. The fact that these stairs at the start don't even work as a trickable surface half the time, the fact that on this speed boost near the end, there's a thin yellow stripe that makes you accidentally trick a little bit too early, the cars. Again, you already know. The cars. My headcanon is that one random Wednesday, Nintendo decided to make a DLC for this game. On Thursday, they started working on all 48 new tracks at once, and on Friday, they released Wave 1. I just don't get why you would put Coconut Mall in the very first wave, even just for hype reasons, because typically you would put the fan favorites later on. But it's even worse now that they decided to go back and make the later ones look good, because now the ones at the start are just totally screwed over. It's still fun to play sometimes, no matter how hard it was to admit it to myself, and it's still an okay track, but man, this could have been so much better. Calamari Desert is the best track in the Turnip Cup, and it's in C tier. It's number 68, I think. That's kind of funny. Anyway, I think this one is pretty cool. I mean, a lot of these turns are at the weirdest angle where no matter what type of drift you do, you're always gonna end up steering into the edge, but except for that, I actually have a pretty fun time on this track. The background isn't the most interesting, especially compared to Sunset Wilds, which has basically the same landscape, but just with way more detail, but it gets the job done, and some of the most unique music in the game makes up for it. I like the way that repeating laps are added into this track to make a pretty basic layout and theme more interesting, and it's done in a way that stops it from being confusing with the trade-off of having one of the strangest looking mini-maps. I hate when people say that driving on the train tracks like ruins the mystique of the original or something, because what does this even mean? Mystique? It's not like the train was going to Narnia every time it went out of view. What mystery is it ruining by just following the train? And the even dumber complaint is that you aren't forced to wait for the train to pass anymore. I say that it's dumber because it's not true. That's literally still a part of the track. You still cross the train tracks. You can still, like, it was not removed at all. As someone who's never played Mario Kart 64 and never will, I thought that having to avoid the train multiple times in different ways throughout the race gave things way more variety. It's only in C tier because, I mean, it's just a desert, but for a course that's literally an oval and then another oval that's just offset from the first oval, it's way better than I dared to hope or expect, especially for the scourge of humanity that is the Turnip Cup. Being the third track in the game, Sweet Sweet Canyon was my first instance of genuinely not knowing where a course ranked, because on the one hand, there's a lot to like here, but on the other hand, it's orange. It's so orange. That seems like the easiest place to start. I think I would like this track so much more if it didn't look like the entire planet was dipped in maple syrup. A lot of creative ideas are already here, like these gingerbread windmills and these pink and blue paths, so imagine how great this track would look with the color palette of Sky High Sundae. Imagine how much more vibrant these pink and blue roads would be if there wasn't a layer of sickly orange painted over everything in sight. But other than that, I think this track is actually pretty good. The color choices kind of messed up the theme for me, but the actual layout and gameplay is still pretty good. I like the cannon that shoots you into the second part of the track, and I think that the two paths add a lot of variety. Making them out of taffy was really creative, and I think the use of anti-gravity worked really well. I still enjoy racing on this one, but the colors kind of just ruin it for me. Another example of the theme not being that great is Ice Ice Outpost. This is another track with two different colored roads, but the only difference here is that it's literally the only thing in this track, and somehow I still prefer it to Sweet Sweet Canyon. Say what you want, but even though the theme here is kind of just ice, well, technically ice and ice, even though the yellow and blue roads don't really have anything to do with that at all, I still think that this track is kind of just overhated. There's enough variety here that makes this fun to play. The first part is in daylight, but then it goes into a cave, and then there's another daylight part where we literally just go straight up, and the roads are supported by big metal structures, and then we go back down and glide over to the start again, and the whole time the two roads are intertwining around each other. Say what you want, but I think that for an ice track with a barely visible concept of some sort of Antarctic ice mining settlement, they put in enough effort to make me kind of like it, but to be honest, the best part is the music. I really like the music. Sherbert Land is basically just the same thing. The best part is the music. Once again, there's basically no theme, and the small amounts of variety sprinkled here and there are what save it. The only reason this one is higher is because I like dark blue. I like the skating Shy Guys, and I like the underwater part at the very end with the glowing crystals and the jellyfish, and I like that not that many parts of this track even repeat. But of course, the track can't be too good, so they make the middle part of this track the most boring thing ever. I don't know what possessed Nintendo to have the middle part of this course be an ice cave with some random bricks along the edges, followed by, I don't even know what this is. It's just a flat, snowy place. Place is the only word I can use to describe it. Again, if there weren't slightly interesting things in the first and last quarters, whatever this is would have absolutely killed this track for me. But the way it is here, it's just fine. I like the music, and I like the ice blocks with faces on them that I never get close to because I always take the underwater section, and the rest of it is kind of just some forest with some nice looking dark blue lighting. Not really the greatest. Ever since the rumors started, I was the biggest advocate for Squeaky Clean Sprint. After Ribbon Road, a track in a giant bathroom had to be great. It had to be. It wasn't. I mean, okay, there's still a lot that I really like here. The amount of detail that went into this room is incredible. Just the fact that on the second and third laps, there's a geyser in the toilet that lets you take a different path over the finish line, allowing you to take alternate routes only on lap 3. Did I really miss this shortcut here? Wow, that's kind of sad. Shows more care and attention than anything from the first third of the booster course pass. Meanwhile, the graphics are also great, and so is the music. The music feels like it could be in Super Mario Odyssey. But in one of the greatest betrayals of all time, the parts of this bathroom that we actually drive around are kind of boring. This bathtub has nothing in it except for a couple bath bombs, and the only thing you're going to be doing in this whole section is tricking off a couple of sponges, and after that, get ready to drive straight for like 10 whole seconds. And after that, now we're in the drain, where the floor is apparently still bath towels, even though that makes no sense. And don't say it's mold, because then why would it have stripes? Except for this wedding ring, there's nothing down here that I like, because there's nothing here I can see. It's just a bland and colorless tunnel with some currents pushing you along. Then we get out of the drain and go around this turn, and now we get to the worst part of the track. On laps 2 and 3, this isn't an issue because we can go up onto that higher shelf and take the shortcut, and I like that area and the cool alternate paths it brings. But on lap 1, we have to go around this left turn with these spots to trick, and I'm not sure if this is just me, but I hate the way these feel. It just feels like all of the detail they put in didn't even interact with the track itself and was just like window dressing. I guess I still like this track, but after Yoshi's Island, and especially after all of the hope I had that this would be the greatest thing ever, it's really no surprise that to me, it's just average and nothing more. As expected for this tier, Amsterdam Drift is basically the perfect middle ground for what I want from a city track. It has a lot of variety to mix things up and stop things from looking samey, but at the same time, some of those things are not my favorite. So like, I think starting the track off by gliding over a train and getting this shot of the countryside with these windmills is actually pretty cool. And I like going through this area and then going through a boat to get back into the city, and instead of the roads just being cramped alleyways that all look identical, there are little trolley stations to break things up, and I like that too. And on the last lap, I like driving through this flower field with the piranha plants and then going under that cool looking building. You may have noticed I skipped the second lap, and okay, I don't really like the canals as much as the rest. I mean, I don't actively dislike them the way I dislike, say, the drains on Squeaky Clean Sprint, and they definitely break things up, but it's also definitely my least favorite part. I mean, if Tora decided to make, like, Venice viaducts or something before it closed down, then I think something like this would have been right at home. And I guess it's sort of at home here, too, because Amsterdam definitely has a lot of canals, but, like, there's just something about these blank white corridors that doesn't quite feel right. Luckily, it doesn't really stop me from liking this course. I also think the music is pretty good, and I know that some people hate the guys in the background going, whoa, but I still like it. And I like the red color scheme, and a lot of the fronts of these buildings actually have some level of detail, and now that we all know what it feels like to not have that, I appreciate it even more. But I can't really say that without mentioning this abomination back there behind the canals that no one thought we would see, but we saw it, and wow, does it look very unfinished. And while we're at it, I guess I should also mention not just how very flat and undetailed the grass is in this area, but also the giant, very visible and very obvious seam in the grass. Something really cool about grass that you might not have known is that in real life it doesn't actually have seams. But overall, I still like Amsterdam Drift. The vibes are on point, and the fact that it's the worst city track in Wave 4 and it's still in C tier is a pretty good sign. The fact that Mario Kart Stadium, the tutorial course, is still this high shows just how on top of things this game was, even from the very beginning. I mean, they lost it for a little bit, but, you know, they got it back. Instead of it just being in some random field like every other starting course, this one feels like an actual stadium inside of a huge city. It feels that way because it is that way. The way this is framed makes it very apparent that, hey, the anti-gravity is coming up ahead, and this is basically what it's gonna look like. Even though as a kid I didn't actually realize the anti-gravity sections were actually upside down and sideways, and I was like, oh look, the tires are like sideways, I don't know what that means. And this is a pretty good introduction to it, just going up and then right back down. That's basically the only thing of note in this track, and I don't even really have much to say on it. It just feels so exciting, like it's showing you the summary of all of the cool adventures you're about to have. Even the music is kind of a summary of what a lot of the songs in this game sound like. It's just fun. Nothing special, obviously, which is why it's in C tier, but still a really great basic course. And since we've now gotten to the best of the basic courses, you know what it's time for. Oh yeah, a new tier. Well, we've made it past the boring sort of okay courses, which means it's time to move on to B tier. Decent. The tracks that are actually pretty great. Even with like 60 left, pretty much all of the ones after this are ones that I can have a very good time playing. Maybe the concepts are more creative, maybe the executions are better, or maybe it's something else. All I know is that I'm not gonna waste time trying to figure it out, because you're not here to see my metaphorical ramblings, you're here to see the ranking. Starting with Dry Dry Desert, and I'm not even sure why I put this track this high, maybe just because it looks really nice. For a bland and featureless desert, this actually doesn't look that bland or featureless. Seeing the sunlight reflect off these item boxes impresses me every time. Even though the first part is pretty basic, the second part is way better and makes up for it. This whirlpool adds a little bit of challenge, I mean, not really, but it forces you to make a turn, and I am actually a fan of this oasis here. I know that putting a giant lake in a track that has the word dry in its name, not once but twice, is a bit strange, but it breaks things up and I like it. I think it looks pretty nice, and I like that it has little fountains and hills to trick off of. I just wonder why they decided to get rid of the Sarlacc monster thing inside of the whirlpool if they were already committed to going against the name of the track. It's more interesting than falling into a random hole in the sand. And also, they got rid of the tornadoes. It wasn't until very recently that I even knew that the Double Dash version had, like, tornadoes, so why'd they get rid of those? Desert tracks are never the most interesting, but at least there's some stuff to make this one decent, like these spiky caterpillar things and these pillars that fall over the course of the race, and I actually like the music too. I don't know what to tell you, it's kinda just there. Come on, man, Snowland is pretty awesome. There's just so much to like here. For one, it looks so good. Snow tracks are a lot like desert tracks, and that getting the theme to actually work is surprisingly difficult, but honestly, I think that putting the track around a frozen lake works pretty much perfectly here. The road and the lake are at different elevations, and that on its own is cool, but everything just feels so open, and the colors are really nice. The snow obviously doesn't have the most detail, but the ice is just objectively the best color, and the main road actually has a lot of colors in it too, considering it's also just ice. And can I mention the crystals in the background? They don't need to be here. This is a snow track, but they just put them in anyway, and they look great. The vibe of this course is kinda just perfect. At one point, the penguins jump out of the water and slide across the ice, and at another point, they just waddle down the road. Even the item boxes slide down the road, but it is kinda weird that they then float up into the sky right after. I don't really know what that's about. The ice physics don't feel as intrusive here as they do in a lot of other places, and even the music feels kinda bouncy and happy. You can't help but feel happy while playing this, or at least I can't help but feel happy while playing this, and I'm so glad they didn't bring back the obnoxious shaky cam from Super Circuit. Maybe in context, the decision to add that made sense, but as someone who's never played that game and never will, I guess I'll just never know the reason behind that ridiculous choice. A lot of people forget that Choco Mountain could literally be in the base game. I'm serious. Look at this. Do you see the detail? Yeah, so do I. The floor actually has texture, and so do the walls. Any other Wave 1 track would have stopped with the stripes and not bothered with any sort of detail beyond that, but here, things actually look good. The only part that doesn't look as nice is this cave area. The rocks look a bit smoother, but it's so dark that I barely even noticed until I started to look for it. And you might be thinking that visually it doesn't look as good because it's basically just brown. And like, yeah, but compared to the original, it's night and day. I don't care if the original looks more like chocolate. This one I feel is just like objectively better. Here, instead of having the whole thing in a perpetual series of valleys that barely resembles a mountain, they just cut off one of the walls and replaced it with either a lake or nothing at all. Call me crazy, but I feel like cliffs are kind of an important part of a mountain, but they still manage to pack in so much variation. Again, I love that they have this cave here, and they even added crystals to stop it from looking kind of random, which is sort of what happened with Rock Mountain's cave. And then after that, we get maybe the best change, the glider ramp. It's the most basic change ever, but flying from one part of the mountain to another will never not be fun, although having to land into a drift immediately after is kind of clunky, and then after that it's basically just one long turn around the edge of a lake, and to stop it from getting too boring, you also have to dodge giant boulders. I mean, I guess in the original, the fact that you could fall off into an earlier part of the track is kind of cool, but I'm willing to sacrifice that for this. People who think that this track is all the same brown cliffs over and over again, I think might be imagining the original or just the very beginning, because that finish line area is literally the only part of the track that actually looks like that. And to top it all off, it has some of the most unique and catchy music in the whole game. I know I'm saying that every time now, but for this one I really mean it, because for some reason it's like country music, and there are harmonicas and stuff, and even though I'm not really sure why they're there, they just made me like an already good track even more. The fact that there's still this much time left in the video should say a lot. Like I said before, there are two ways to approach Rainbow Road. You can make it the most complicated and difficult final gauntlet known to man, or you can make it pretty easy and happy, and I prefer the second way, because the entirety of the cut before that is the final gauntlet, and you've already beaten that, so now you get to celebrate and reminisce about all of your memories playing the game, which seems fitting for the last track. Again, I've said all this before. That last one seems to be where 3DS Rainbow Road is doing, but it's no longer the last track. And so removed from that context, this iteration is kind of missing something for me. I still really like it, but as a random guy, I don't really have the backdrop for what made this work as the last track in Mario Kart 7. I mean, the music kind of helps, but the way it is here, for me, it's kind of just a course. But that's not to say that it's bad. I absolutely love the way that this track looks. Some people say that it's too blue, and like, it's mainly blue, yeah, but I don't see that as a bad thing. Rosaline's Ice World, I think that's too blue. This, I just think it's blue. I just love the way it looks like it's made of magic. It's like sparkly glass with little shooting stars inside of it. That's just cool. And going around planets and stuff is a pretty neat idea for a track that's kind of in outer space. None of them look the best, especially Saturn's rings, but the fact that we're driving on Saturn's rings at all makes up for it. And some people are mad that the moon has water physics instead of low gravity physics, but I don't really care about that either. And I guess the tube thingy at the start of lap 3 is kind of strange and out of place, but honestly, none of that even really matters. This is just a pretty good rainbow road track, and I'm sure with the right context, it's even better. Sydney Sprint is 100% carried by the music. Literally, the only things I like about this track are the opera house, the fact that it's open, and the fact that it has the catchiest song ever made. Other than that though, this track kind of sucks, and I hate to say it, but it's true. Graphically, it's really bad, and so much of the course is just driving past huge fields of grass and through blank parks. I like that at the start you drive past these huge metal structures in the middle of the road and you wonder what they are, but then later on you approach them from the opposite direction and realize that they're actually a series of ramps. That's pretty interesting, but a lot of the roads are literally just highway roads, and other than this one part where you go through a boat, basically the only thing you have to look at in the background is an amusement park? What? There's some actual buildings, but mainly in the distance. The closest we even get to the city is in this little highway section, or one of the highway sections, and we immediately turn back around toward the amusement park. In a lot of ways, it feels like this was designed with the city being an afterthought, and also the track design being an afterthought. And nothing is a forethought? You know what I mean? I still like the track, I guess, but only because of the music. Because the whole thing is kind of just a bunch of unrelated stuff cobbled together. I don't know, the more I think about it, the weirder it seems that I even put it this high. The music is very good, and honestly, that might be all there is to say. Another track where its layout seems like an afterthought is Daisy Cruiser. Good god, so many of these turns do not feel good, especially this one going back outside. But honestly, the fact that the theme of this course is so strong still makes this one pretty fun, even when you're driving into walls because you couldn't tell it was there until you were already inside of it. I don't know, this track kind of just makes me feel like I'm on vacation, and I like it. The cute little swimming pool with the Goombas and their life preservers, this really nice looking dining room with the tables that move back and forth, which is a cool little touch, and the music that sounds very calming and is also almost exactly like Cheap Cheap Beach's music, even the color of the wood on the floor. I mean, no vacation I've ever been on has had a hole in the floor that leads into a completely flooded room with giant clams, but I'm sure if there had, I would have had a great time. A lot of these turns really don't have the maintenance of the bones in your body in mind, and for Wave 5 there isn't the most texture, especially in the floor, but the floor is still a nice color, and everything else is also still a nice color, and it's still a pretty enjoyable experience. And by the way, this is only the second Wave 5 track on this ranking so far, which is something to keep in mind. Nitro Mario Circuit isn't my favorite Mario Circuit in this game, but it is by far the most creative. I love the idea of turning a Mobius strip into a track, and being upside down for the whole second half is just really cool, even though it is kind of dark because the sun is technically underground. I just really like playing on this track because it really feels like you're there. No one talks about the background, and I don't get it, because a giant civilization of toads on a bunch of floating islands is like one of the coolest themes in the game. Even the music is pretty cool, with a sort of electronic feel that, at times, suits this game's vibe better than big band music does. I genuinely don't have that much to say on this track. None of the turns even really have anything on them, and there's basically nothing to make this layout interesting whatsoever. I mean, the Mobius strip idea is cool, but if I'm being honest, you cannot tell in the slightest while you're actually playing the track, but it's still somehow this good. It's just really satisfying, I don't know what to tell you. Letting go of your drift right before this glider at the end and just letting it run out instead of tricking and making you zoom all the way to the finish line is one of the best experiences in any track. It's just good. Yoshi Valley has a really cool gimmick with a bunch of different paths you can take, and basically no one ever takes them. I mean, I'm pretty sure at least 3/4 of people know that the fastest path is to just go left and then across this bridge, and even though that's great for winning, a lot of us, myself included, never even really get to see the tunnel or the giant cannon, which are both pretty cool inclusions, and I don't have any footage of for that exact reason, and that kinda sucks. But even still, there are plenty of things to like about this track. Like, even though I take this bridge every time, I like it, and there is actually an element of challenge to it, and a lot of the turns have that element too. There's even this giant egg guarding the bridge that you have to make your way past, which is surprisingly difficult at times. Even though the main gimmick is basically one I never see or use, that's not to say there aren't other ones, and there was very clearly a lot of effort put into this track. I mean, just look at this. Look how great this track looks. It feels like an entire place. Meanwhile, this one has country music too, and it's also great. But honestly though, even if I did take more than just this one path, I still probably wouldn't put it any higher. I mean, I like the way this track looks a lot, but it's still mostly brown and green. So, what would a brown and green track done better look like? Mushroom Gorge. The graphics are way worse, and there is probably less overall effort put into it, but I still like it, honestly, quite a lot more, and here's why. For one, I just think that the colors are more appealing. Even though there are way less details, I just prefer the brighter shades of green and brown in this one. Plus, it just feels really open, and along with the cave, the whole thing is just more visually interesting to me. And don't think I'm gonna move past this cave that fast. I love that the whole last part of the track is just a giant cave, and to illuminate the whole thing so you can really feel the size of it, we yet again have a bunch of really beautiful crystals on the walls, with some nice purples and pinks that aren't really present in the other places. There are even like spores from the mushrooms glowing in the air. This track just makes me feel like I'm in a Mario game. Which one? I don't know. And the main gimmick is probably also better than Yoshi Valley's. It obviously required way less effort, but I think it was executed just as well, if not better. The way to handle these mushrooms is introduced piece by piece. First, we have a single red mushroom, and then we learn that we can bounce on them. Then next, we have to string a couple of those together with the green one at the end, which teaches us that these ones don't make us bounce. Then we turn the corner and get this really great view of an entire cave filled with mushrooms. You need to use everything you've just learned to progress, and there's no easy way around it. And there's even a third type of mushroom we get introduced to, even here in the final gauntlet of the track. The blue mushroom that acts as a glider, which is just such a cool idea. Making your way across the entire cave without falling because you've learned when to trick and how to angle yourself is just really satisfying. Even though on 200cc, or if you have a mushroom or a star, you will fall off the edge and immediately die. And there are things I haven't even mentioned yet, like the music, which feels so bouncy and chaotic that I'm still not entirely sure what instruments are even used. There's basically no cohesive theme here except mushrooms, but that one thing is done so well that it's still this high on the list. Very fun, very awesome. It is kind of funny that we're already done with Wave 2 though. After London Loop, it seems kind of contradictory to say this, but I genuinely think Vancouver Velocity might have too much variety, or at least not the type of variety that I was looking for. City tracks like Amsterdam Drift have tons of interesting and unique ideas to keep the layout from becoming a confusing and jumbled mess, but one of the things I appreciate about them is the fact that they're actually in the city. If you think about it, like half of this track doesn't even take place in Vancouver. Most of the first lap is just this bridge in the forest, and a pretty good chunk of the second lap is this random park. We barely even see Vancouver until the final lap of the track named after Vancouver. But that's my main problem with it, and it's not even like it's that big a deal. Yeah, I probably would have preferred if the whole first half of the track wasn't just the woods, but it's not like they did it badly. I still liked all of these parts. The use of anti-gravity on this bridge section makes it so much fun, and honestly, even this park isn't that boring. And the parts actually in the city kind of make up for it. I mean, going through a hockey rink not once but twice is not only something that I consider good variety, but is also very accurate to Canada. We should have driven through a maple syrup factory though, so 0 out of 10, I don't know. And I guess the graphics are also pretty good, but so are the colors. Putting different colors behind every window on mostly featureless buildings actually works here, unlike New York Minute. And even though I'm not familiar with any part of Vancouver that's just a bunch of huge metal poles with fire at the top, I'm sure it exists somewhere, and it all still looks pretty good, and definitely on par with the rest of Wave 5. And honestly, I think the music kind of carries this track too, like Sydney Sprint, just less so, because this one actually has something of value otherwise. It's like half orchestral arrangement and half electronic, and I would happily put it on my playlist. Maybe I will actually. Not my favorite city track, but still a pretty serviceable one. The Mario Circuit from Super Circuit should absolutely be the worst one, and somehow it's not. And what's more, it's actually pretty good, which for a track from Super Circuit is pretty impressive. Looking at the original, the only thing I can see from there that looks remotely okay is the trees, which actually look pretty good, but here, they were able to make not just the trees, but everything look great. You know that thing I've been saying all along about how basic tracks need to look good because it's the only thing going for them? Well, this is an example of when that actually happens. These are some of the nicest looking trees this game has to offer, and the Booster Course Pass just made me appreciate them even more. But Nintendo still knew that a graphical upgrade wouldn't be enough to save one of the most basic tracks from one of the most basic games, And so, they went ahead and said, flatness? What flatness? And then they immediately took an entire section of the track and tilted it 45 degrees. I think this was the beginning of the obsession Nintendo has with going so unnecessarily hard on the Super Circuit remakes. I like to imagine that they were trying to think of any way they could squeeze some sort of small verticality into the track, and then eventually someone just gave up and decided that in the opening showcase, an entire quarter of the map would just rise out of the ground. I just love this so much, because it really is just creativity for the sake of creativity. And even though everything else in the track, except for the pit stop at the end, is pretty much just normal turns, I don't mind, because it still did its job. I don't think of this as another one of those flat courses, I think of it as that one course with the part of the road that's lifted up. It might be a bit dramatic to say that they've totally recontextualized what this track even is, but to be honest, that's not far from the truth. Bowser's Castle is just coolness incarnate. Everything about it so perfectly fits the theme of an evil and mechanical castle, and it's so cool. These Bowser heads that shoot lightning, the spinning fire, the anti-gravity making these twisted and angled floors, the giant wrecking balls, the glider that spits you out into a giant chasm filled with lava geysers. The fact that it took me that long to list all of the cool things about this track should tell you how cool it is. And obviously, the centerpiece of the track, the giant elemental Bowser. Now, I'm gonna be honest, this is one of the only parts of the base game that actually looks kind of dated, but that doesn't detract from it being such a cool idea. You have basically 2 seconds to figure out which path is gonna get you clobbered and which path is gonna be fine, and for the last non-Rainbow Road Nitro course in the game, before like the original DLC and the Booster Course Pass, I'd say that that challenge is absolutely allowed. This is meant to be the final gauntlet. And almost as cool, after this room, anti-gravity twists the 2 paths so that they're mirror images of each other, so you can look straight up and see a road identical to yours. And to the people who say that we spend too much time outside of the castle, I think you might just be remembering it wrong, because it's a total of like 15 seconds per lap, and that's being very generous. I don't really need to over-explain how cool this track is. Just playing it will give you an idea of the pure stage presence that this whole course has, the cogs and pistons all around you, this menacing shot of the castle towering over you and filling your whole screen, the music. Bowser's Castle just feels like an epic final battle, even though I guess technically the battle's not over yet. It's just awesome. For Wario Stadium, I decided to feed my thoughts into ChatGPT and see if it could put those thoughts into words. Let's try it. Wario Stadium is a fantastic depiction of an obstacle course, executed brilliantly. The track's design resembles an insane monster truck rally, and it's a thrilling experience. The numerous turns are not only satisfying, but also manage to make the gimmick of consecutive ramps enjoyable, unlike in tracks like Waluigi Stadium. What's great is that they repeat this multiple times. Even minor details like boosting across rocks in a muddy pond add a creative touch. The standout feature of the course, however, is the clever use of anti-gravity. Racing sideways on a narrow metal strip without railings feels precarious and exciting. Surprisingly, the underwater section at the end, despite its unusual placement, doesn't feel out of place, although that left turn can be a bit annoying. Perhaps I just appreciate tracks that allow gliding through the finish line. Graphically, Wario Stadium stands out as one of the best tracks in the game. The level of detail in the rocks and the walls, made to look like mud, is impressive. Even from a distance, small specks on the walls are noticeable. The floor too boasts intricate design. Did they really write that? That's so dumb. Visualize how it might look in a flat, featureless setting, such as the ones presented in the Booster Course Pass, and you'll realize the importance of the current level of detail. As for the music, it's worth noting that while it may have been used in Waluigi Pinball, it fits Wario Stadium perfectly. Despite its electronic nature, it exudes high energy, making it a great complement to the track's intensity. This revised version maintains the enthusiasm for Wario Stadium, while presenting the information in a more structured and concise— wait a minute, I'm just reading its stupid conclusion thingy. Well, you get the idea, but I'm probably not doing that again. That was so dumb. TikTok Clock is just so appealing in so many ways. Not only is it based off of a world from Super Mario 64, which is a good sign that we'll hopefully get some cool Super Mario Odyssey tracks in Mario Kart X, but the world that they chose actually makes for good, compelling track design. Can you imagine a Dire Dire Docks track? That would be the most boring thing ever. There are just so many cool ideas that accompany a track inside of a clock tower? Are we in a clock tower? A clock land. How's that? And they're all present here. In this track, The floor is clocks, and we can use the hands as shortcuts. In this track, the walls are clocks, with these giant pendulums that block our way, and you have to figure out where it's going to be by the time you get there, so you cannot be there. And the floors are also gears, and they spin different ways, and they can either slow you down or speed you up. You can choose to either glide over them or try to get them to work for you instead of against you, and you can even try to trick off of the teeth. But not only are the floors gears this way, they're also gears this way at the very end, and you can use the one spinning forward to get a little bit of extra speed that might get you first place. And I guess in a way, the walls are also gears, completing the Punnett square of clocks, gears, floors, and walls. And the ambiance gets even better than that, because the floors are a really cool color. Oh yeah, just kidding. It's because this has one of the most extra backgrounds in the entire game, and I'm so glad. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but you know perfectly well that if this was brought back in the Booster Course Pass instead of in the base game, it would look much closer to the DS version than it does here, and at that point, you might as well not even bring it back. Look at this. And what a surprise. The music is good. I love the way that clock sounds are incorporated into it, and it really does feel kind of clocky. I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's almost like the music pauses for an infinitely small period at the end of every beat, kind of like staccato notes, but not really, and I can almost hear the metronome without it even being there, which I guess is fitting for a clock track. I might be the only one who knows what I'm trying to say. Point is, I like this track. It's pretty awesome. Did you know it's called Electrodrome and not Electrodome? What even is a drome? Drome, denoting a place for running or racing. Oh, I guess that makes sense then. Anyway, this is probably the second best use of anti-gravity in the game, after Dragon Driftway. Actually, I forgot about Mute City, I guess that's probably better. And also Big Blue, damn it. Okay, well you get the idea. The anti-gravity is good. And it's funny that it's on a nightclub track as well, so while everyone down below in the crowds is probably doing drugs, the lights are absolutely on drugs, and the layout is absolutely on drugs. From the very beginning, things start getting twisty. You look to your right and see this weird black wall, only to realize that that's actually the next part of the track, and you just turn around and go back the way you came from, but sideways. Then it splits into two different paths that circle around each other like Ice Ice Outpost, but I'm trying to think of a different way to say on drugs. It's just so much fun, and this track would be nowhere near as fun if it wasn't for the color scheme. Purple is an underrated color, and the light purple colors everywhere is just perfect. Everything I said about TikTok Clock having a super extra background pretty much applies here too, and honestly, they could not have picked two better colors for the splitting roads. Building up a drift around this corner with the floor dancing underneath you will never not be satisfying, and for a track like this, you need to have good music. Too bad there's not a single good song in this game. Yeah, who am I kidding? Of course the music is great. I'm gonna be honest, the Star Cup was the hardest cup for me to rank by far, because they're all so good that near the beginning, when I ranked them and there weren't as many tracks placed in their spots yet, and it was basically just a ranking of 16 tracks at that point, or maybe even 12, it was genuinely impossible to decide which of these I liked the most, because they're all really good, and it's not even in the top 3 cups in the game, but we'll get to that. To sum things up, there's a part in this track where your cart forms a trail of rainbow polygons behind you, and that makes this about as good of a B-tier track as you can get. But you know what that means. Oh yes indeed, a new tier. A tier, but this one has several catches to it. This is by far the biggest tier because Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is just a really great game, and so I've decided to split it into A+, A, and A-, because even within the ones that I think are really good, I can further divide them into the ones that I really like more and really like less. Starting with the ones that aren't necessarily the highest ranked, but are still great tracks, A-, pretty epic, in honor of Jack's films because of that one thing that happened. But before we get to that, we actually have one more thing to do. Cheeseland is an enigma of the highest order, and I truly can't decide what tier it even goes in, let alone where it could possibly be ranked. I could not tell you if I like this track any more or any less than any of the ones we've done so far, or any of the ones we still have to do. I don't like it the same amount as the B tier tracks, or the A- tier tracks, or the same amount as any other tier of tracks. It's just Cheeseland. So many people either absolutely loathe this course or swear that it's the greatest thing in the entire Mario Kart series, and I don't think there are enough people like me who are perfectly fine with it being just somewhere in the middle. In the original, this track was kind of playing off the joke that the moon is made of cheese, and so the whole thing took place on, you guessed it, the moon. But then they totally scrapped that idea and put this one on Earth instead. This is where most people say that they replaced it with another boring desert track, and even though I think it definitely would have been cooler on the moon, because I think we just need more outer space tracks in general, calling this a boring desert track really doesn't seem that fair. There are so many cool things that this track has to offer that most other desert tracks don't. Mainly how vertical it is. Not like up and down vertical, but how many times it just changes in elevation. That and the number of shortcuts that it has make the track a lot more interesting than if the whole thing was just sand. But we're gonna get to the shortcut thing in a second. The thing is though, this track very clearly isn't just sand. There are Swiss cheese holes in the floor, and sometimes even in the walls, and the fact that a lot of the first part of the track kind of takes place in valleys does actually set this one apart for me. There is no desert track quite like this. Cheeseland being too similar to other tracks is not an issue I have. And a lot of people hate the music, but again, I really don't see where you're coming from. In fact, it's probably the second best saxophone solo in the game, the first one being the next one in their ranking, actually. And okay, yeah, it's time to talk about the shortcuts now. So I'm not sure if you've ever noticed, but there's off-road pretty much everywhere, and if you get triple mushrooms, or even one mushroom, you can skip pretty much half of the course, especially the last half. Online, I totally get why that's annoying, but as someone who doesn't really play online that much, I actually really like being able to chain these two glider shortcuts together. And for the average player, I'm not confident that there are too many shortcuts is actually a thing that gets worried about, so I've basically been defending this track the whole time. So that means I like it, right? I mean, I guess so, but it's still not the most interesting premise, and just because I don't think Nintendo completely botched it, doesn't mean I think this is the most perfect execution of this theme that could have possibly happened. Once again, it's just Cheeseland. Just another thing that causes controversy for absolutely no reason. Anyway, onto the actual A- ones now. That's right, Dolphin Shoals is the one with the best music. We all know it, we've all heard it, and if that was the only thing this track had, it wouldn't be this high, but luckily it's also pretty good otherwise. For a long time, I really didn't like this track because a pretty big chunk of it was in this dimly lit cave where the only way you can get across is by tricking from pipe current to pipe current, and I absolutely hated that, and I still hate that to be honest, which is why recently I've started going this way on the far right, which I enjoy a lot more. Although I still have to admit that making the whole center chunk of a track about basically a coral reef, this dingy little cavern, is kind of a strange idea, and even though tricking off this eel is fun, if you fall you just have to do a slow drive of shame, which is decidedly less fun, but other than that, the ideas at work here absolutely do not disappoint. The beginning part where you're just driving straight is made more interesting by being able to trick through these little bubbles, and also because of this gorgeous dolphin statue that's carved into the mountain, which I never noticed for the longest time. But the part of this track that really shines is the giant turn around this whirlpool, which I also didn't notice for the longest time. I think most of my original issues with this track just came down to me being blind. Hearing the music turn from muffled xylophones or whatever to some random guy on a saxophone releasing his entire soul straight into the microphone will never not be amazing, although it kinda sucks that you can never be outside for long enough to hear the full Mario Kart lick in full effect. Even though this general concept could have been done better, and was done better a couple years later in Super Mario Odyssey, granted it is a different type of game, this track is still a classic for a reason. If you think about it, Merry Mountain is just a way better version of Rock Rock Mountain, and I don't just say that because they're both the third track in their cup and they were both part of Wave 3 and they both end in Mountain. They actually have the same general layout, except this time we go up in the first half and then down in the second half. It just so happens that this time around, everything is actually good. I held off on forming a real opinion on this one at first because I didn't want the fact that it was a holiday track to cloud my judgment since it was the holidays, but in the years since then, I have to say that I honestly haven't stopped liking it once, and now that it's the holiday season again, I can officially say it's pretty good. What a beautiful place, man. One of the most magical feeling areas in the entire game. This Christmas village is so detailed and whimsical and fun, and it's made even better by this train, which is just the icing on the cake. And as if that wasn't good enough, you can actually follow the tracks for a little bit and watch it fly away. And the colors are so beautiful. The road has so many hints of colors that it almost feels like it's made out of an aurora borealis or something. And the fact that it takes place at sunset is just perfect. This is what a sunset looks like, Nintendo, okay? And the music feels super festive and happy too. It really is too bad that the last part of the track slacks off so much. I mean, this area up top with the giant presence is okay, and I think that the ski lift going in and out of it is creative, and I think it's funny that they put a half pipe here, even though it's very obviously slower to use it, but the way back down to the bottom is absolutely inexcusable. What is this? Exactly. It's nothing, and it's such a bummer because with a track with such a great feel to it, this could have easily been one of the very top ones if they had actually, finished it. But in its current state, it's still good enough to be this high, and for a DLC with as many problems as it does, I'm just glad we got something this good. I'm gonna say it, Peach Gardens is a perfect execution of its theme. I just love the feeling of this track, and it makes me feel like I'm having a tea party with English high society. The white bricks, the hedges, the overly elaborate architecture, the appropriately sized giant estate with the beautiful pink roof. Sure, the grass on this one part looks kind of ugly, but everything else from everywhere else feels so unique and so unlike any other track in this game, which is basically just defining what unique means, that it doesn't even matter. And the layout is pretty unique too. Instead of forcing you to take a specific path through this central maze area, you can kind of just do whatever you want, and I think that's really cool. And there's actually a lot more elevation than you'd expect. Then they throw in a piranha plant just because, and even this boring grass area has some mole holes, and driving on the front porch of Peach's mansion is just really fun. And over the course of the race, the chain chomps will just start going all over the place, and of course the whole third lap is just backwards, and that's honestly just a really awesome change. Like, the track would have been good enough anyway, but then they went ahead and went the extra mile to make it even cooler. Obviously, if they started doing this on every track, it would get kind of annoying, but did anyone ever really think that that was gonna happen? When they started making non-repeating tracks in Mario Kart 7, did people shout to the heavens how unfair it was that every single track after that for the rest of Mario Kart history would be exactly like that, and there would never be a standard 3-lap track ever again? No, because that was never a thing that was gonna happen. Here, it just makes a unique track even more unique, and I think it works super well. Hell, the fact that on the last lap we get to glide over the maze and slam our entire bean straight into Luigi's hand alone would have shot this course straight up to at least B tier. Even the music is unique since it's in 3/4 time signature instead of 4/4, which basically means that there are 3/4 notes in every measure instead of 4, and sometimes I'll load this one up just to hear the violins do their thing. You know it, you love it, it's Peach Gardens, man. Just the fact that Athens Dash isn't trying and failing to be like the other city tracks gives it so much credit, because think about it. What's the first thing you think of when I say Athens? You already know the answer, and that's the point. Like, we obviously see some parts of the actual city of Athens, but a majority of the track actually takes place within the ruins of ancient Greece. And thank God, because that's the part basically everyone wants to see. And it's not like all of the ruins are just copy and pastes of each other either. I had a feeling that the track was going to be this way, but I didn't really have a lot of faith that they wouldn't make the whole thing feel super samey and confusing like London Loop. If there's no variation and all 3 laps are different versions of the same thing, even if it's unique, you are kind of just gonna be lost and bored. But here, I'm surprised how much detail they were able to pack into this track. Pretty much the first thing we see is this giant hill that shows the entirety of the city sprawled out below us, and then after that we get to drive across the seats of an amphitheater, and then we glide over this forest into a cave, and we go down another hill, except this time it's a cliff, and then we see a different section of the ruins that actually looks visually distinct from the previous part. Then we go up these stairs, which are so easy to trick off of, by the way, and make both times you go up them so much more satisfying, except sometimes you'll just not be able to fit through the doorway and slam into the wall, which kind of sucks. Then we glide down this plateaued part of the city, then we drive through this courtyard, then we're just in a meadow where we have to dodge some boulders, then it's the stairs again, and that's it. I didn't have to go back and replay the track to remember all of that. It's just that there was enough creativity put into these bland brown and gray ruins that took them from just that into something that has so much life. And I guess the graphics are good, but the other thing I really want to talk about is the music. The fact that the Booster Course Pass version is literally almost identical to the tour version, but with better sounding instruments, speaks volumes about how perfect this song already was. Even though I've never been to Greece, I can't deny how perfectly Greek this music feels, and it's just another thing that adds life to a track that wasn't afraid to be different. By the way, the only reason I can actually remember what the tour version sounds like is because I used it during the Return of Jafar segment of episode 9 back in June. So there's a little fun fact for you. If GBA Mario Circuit was the track that started the trend of Nintendo putting insane amounts of effort into Super Circuit remakes, Ribbon Road was the track that got absolutely everyone talking about it. Seriously, the fact that we went from this to this is one of the biggest glow-ups in the history of gaming. They saw some presence in a vague blue void and went, that's kinda boring, let's make it a child's bedroom instead. And they just absolutely went with it in every possible way. There's so much detail packed into every corner of this bedroom that I'm still just as impressed now every single time I play this track as I was back in like 2017 when I first saw it, after I finally realized that those ads they kept showing me for the DLC were actually a part of this game that I could buy and download and play, and weren't just commercials for Zelda and Animal Crossing. Even though most of the track is just random colored roads like that other bad track, this time there's actually stuff to look at instead of being confined to claustrophobic little tubes, and it just fills the entire thing with so much personality. Imagine how much less interesting this green section would be if these wind-up toys weren't walking across the track. Imagine how much less interesting this blue section would be if it didn't have these two genuinely cool and somewhat challenging shortcuts, and wasn't surrounded by the entire miniature kingdom of some kid with a very weird and impressive passion for architecture. Imagine how much less interesting this glider section would be if these jack-in-the-boxes weren't here, and also the rest of the toys weren't here, and also the bedroom wasn't here, and the whole track was just some wavy cloth roads inside of some blue void. A lot of people are angry that this wasn't really a remake and was more of just a new track. I mean, if you totally change the layout, and you totally change the concept, and you totally change, like, even the music, what's even left of the original track, except the name of something that's barely even recognizable? And, like, that is a totally valid reason to not like this track. If I was a young kid in 2001 who grew up with Super Circuit, I'd probably also feel kind of betrayed if I knew a track I had a connection with was coming back, only to realize that it really wasn't. But as someone who isn't one of those kids, you have to admit that as an actual course, the changes they made probably did improve things a lot. I mean, I've never played Super Circuit, so maybe I'm missing out, and the original version of this track actually was clearly superior in every way. But I don't really see the point in sobbing in despair about what could have been, when what could have been probably would have been worse anyway. I'm more than fine with the masterpiece we have here. I think when people say that Wave 1 is terrible, they're misremembering things slightly, and I'm definitely part of that. The truth is, most of Wave 1 is terrible. Ninja Hideaway is great. The fact that this ambitious of a track came from Tor is probably the only net positive thing that game ever did, except for like Piranha Plant Cove, and it absolutely is ambitious. This track takes the splitting paths of Yoshi Valley and makes it vertical. And even though there are a couple of issues, like how if you take the top path, you kind of have to get lucky and hope that this elevating section doesn't screw you over and send you into the wall, the sheer amount of different ways you can go makes this sprawling complex actually feel sprawling. I mean, when you really think about how big this place is, it's kinda crazy. Don't get me wrong, a lot of the turns are way too sharp, and you can definitely tell it was made for a game where it's physically impossible to drive off an edge, but that doesn't lower it for me as much as it might for other people, and yeah, it's not the best looking graphically, but visually, like, wow, there are so many cool visual choices here. Obviously, the style of the buildings looks cool, but the color choices are pretty great, the interiors look cool with the exposed gears and the weird garlic clove-shaped windows. There's literally a part where you can get a glider boost from an air current coming out of a huge stalk of bamboo. And the music. Dolphin Shoals has the best song in the game, probably objectively, but this song is without a doubt in my top 3 favorite. Everything about it is so good. There are still some Japanese elements in there, but most of the song just goes so hard for no reason at all, and it's so awesome. The fact that it's in a minor key for some reason, the bass line, just the melody in general, I will happily listen to this song any day of the year, month, week, or day. Yep, any day of the day. It's that good of a song. What even else is there to say? Hey, that kind of rhymes. The fact that a non-city Nitro track from Mario Kart Tour made it this high into a ranking with so many other fantastic courses for competition really says it all. And the fact that there's actually a second non-city Nitro track from Tour that's even higher. But somehow this isn't even my favorite track from Wave 1. Koopa Cape is just so infectiously fun, and the interesting thing is, I really didn't want this track to get into the Booster Course Pass. The only things I had ever seen of the track were smudgy brown cavern areas, and I was like, Really, this is the track you all want to take up one of the precious spots in this DLC, and even though the very start of this track is like that, the rest of it is basically just an amusement park ride. Seriously, the whole middle part of this course in this mountain valley really does feel like one of those Raging River Rapids things, and it's just so much fun trying to angle your cart correctly to dodge all of these rock pillars. It really is too bad that they got rid of the spinny electric things in the water area and just flooded the entire thing, but I have to be honest, the way it is now isn't actively bad, it could just be actively way better. And the ways that the flowing water and the half-pipes interact in this course to make it honestly really fun to play totally makes up for it, I think. At first I thought that the track didn't look the best graphically, but honestly, I can only say that for the trees. This Minecraft cobblestone looking floor absolutely has detail whether you like it or not, and compared to Wave 1 grass, which was just one continuous color, this grass is an absolute godsend. Honestly, just the fact that it has any bright colors is better than what I was expecting, and you'll never guess, but the music is actually good. But don't tell anyone, that's a secret. Here it is, the other non-city tour nitro track. I didn't really know what to expect from Piranha Plant Cove, but it definitely surpassed my very low expectations. I think all of the tour city tracks having layouts that change every lap kind of disgraced that idea as a whole, and now anytime a track uses that gimmick, there are always gonna be some people who have traumatic flashbacks and immediately write it off as terrible. But if I'm being honest, that gimmick is what makes this track work. None of these 3 laps are really strong enough to be worth repeating more than once, but it's the combination of all 3, with each one having slight variations of the same theme, that tie the whole thing together into an entire experience. This track is kind of huge when you think about it, and every time I slowly float down over one of these giant expanses of sand, I get more and more convinced of it. In one area, you're by some shipwrecks and some ruins, but now you're above the water in this little plant area, and now you're exploring some more ruins, but this time above the water. It really does feel like you're driving around an actual place, and it does it better than most of the city tracks that are based off of actual places, if I'm being honest. I'd be lying if I said it didn't get a bit stale by the end, but when you think about how much staler it would be if it just repeated like lap 3 all 3 times, it kind of puts things into perspective. And considering how underwater tracks are sort of infamous for being not the best, this is literally the highest one on the list, and it's like number 40, I think. I'd say that everything this track was trying to do worked pretty well. Oh yeah, and the music is pretty great too. It feels kind of Little Mermaid-y, and it changes keys like 3 times, and I'd totally listen to it outside of the game. And even cooler, it's also in 3/4 time signature, making it the 3rd track in the game to not have a time signature of 4 quarter notes per bar, although the 3rd one we haven't actually seen yet. We'll look at that one later. Piranha Plant Cove is a pretty good track, and much better than the other Piranha Plant themed track in the game. Even though I've never played a Zelda game in my entire life, I can still clearly tell how much love was put into Hyrule Circuit. I mean, it would have been nice if we could have spent a bit more time, like, in the castle, but I get it. They had a lot of stuff they wanted to show, and they absolutely did it. From the market stalls to the retextured piranha plants to the fact that they replaced the normal gold coins with these shiny emerald coins makes the whole track feel so alive. Can I talk about this castle for a little bit? This is one of the most visually and graphically impressive things in the whole game, and I try to take the puzzle shortcut through the center of the rotunda every single time, although I usually fail. I don't really have much to say. They just so clearly knew what they wanted to make and just went off and made it. The layout is amazing, it has so many great turns, these stones are so detailed that it makes me want to stand up and do a backflip, I don't know. The music is just so triumphant and so Zelda-y, and even I know that without having played a single one of the games. Again, I really have nothing to say, it's just a really awesome track, and I like it a lot. Sunset Wilds is the most overhated track in this entire game. People despise this track so much because the name is a complete and utter lie, and like, it is, and I hate that it's a lie just as much as the next person, but I don't let that affect my opinion of the track itself. I actually really like this one, even after time trialing it for like 5 hours straight one time. Why I picked this one in particular? I don't know. But yeah, just because I'm a defender of this track doesn't mean the sunset thing isn't annoying. In case you somehow don't know, back in the Super Circuit version, the sky would get a little bit darker after every lap, which is a really cool thing that the whole track was named for in the first place that would have been cool to see brought back. Except they didn't bring it back. Nintendo, The track is called Sunset Wilds. It's an entire half of the name, and you didn't get it right. Some people might say, well, it's kind of a minor issue, but that's just it. It's a minor issue. It's so simple. What was so hard about adding in this minor thing that was like the only reason why people liked the original at all? One of the arguments I heard was that the engine can't support it. You mean the engine for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, the game whose revolutionary graphics still seem just as revolutionary a decade after it came out? I'm wondering if by it's not part of the engine, they just meant it's not part of the engine yet, because we haven't built it in yet, because there are no tracks in this game with a changing sky. Maybe I'm stupid, but I really don't see how a sky that slowly turns from orange to purple is the thing that can best the software of the game that gave us Big Blue. But even though that's annoying, it doesn't really change how much I like the track. It is kind of a minor issue, and even though it would have been trivially easy to add it in, I still think the track is okay this way. I guess there are other changes too, but if you're really that upset that they replaced the Native American Shy Guys with Prospector Shy Guys, that probably says more about you than it does about this track's actual quality. The truth is, the track does actually look pretty good. Sure, I'd prefer it if the sky was a little bit more than just orange, if you know what I mean, but the way it is now still looks really good. Comparing the level of detail on these mountains to the level of detail on the Calamari Desert Mountains is like night and day, or like sunset to sunset, but not technically sunset though, if you know what I mean. And I don't know, I really like the obstacles on this track. I think the mud is a pretty decent way of slowing you down. I like that they bring back the Wario Stadium thing and force you to jump from rock to rock, and I like that this left turn here gets made more difficult by having to dodge the Shy Guys. What can I say? I have a lot more appreciation for the way that this track is laid out after playing it non-stop for an ungodly amount of time. Have I mentioned the music yet? This is a certified head-bopping song, and I can't decide if it sounds like Mickey, Donald, and Goofy marching in time with the beat with the sun in the background. That's a weird description, but you can picture it, can't you? Or Video Games by Jack Black. Sounds like both. I don't know what to tell you. I think this is just where Nintendo's obsession with going way over the top with Super Circuit remakes really came back to bite them. It doesn't take a genius to realize that this and Ribbon Road aren't exactly identical in scope, but to me, I still stand by this one. It gets my seal of approval, which obviously vetoes any other criticism about it, probably. I don't know any other way I can describe Royal Raceway than pretty. The music is pretty, the pink sky is pretty, the confetti falling out of the air is pretty, the trees are more than pretty, and I encourage you to actually stop and look at them once in a while because they're absolutely gorgeous, and I don't get why this is the only track in the base game with these like cherry blossom-esque trees. The whole thing is just pretty. And the fact that people's biggest complaint about it is how you can't drive off of the track a way you aren't supposed to go and drive in circles outside of Peach's front door for absolutely no reason pretty much tells you how perfect this really is. I don't even really have much to say about this one. I like the glider part where you can fly past the hot air balloons and look at the rest of the track. I like a lot of the turns. I like that a lot of it is around this really nice looking lake. A pretty looking lake, you might say. There's really not that much to say about this one, to be honest. I just love playing this one, to be inside of this amazing pink kingdom, listening to the peaceful, pretty music, trying and failing to glider vector at this one spot over and over and over again. Look at how this looked in Mario Kart 64, and look at it here. Need I say more? For the longest time, I did not like Wario's Gold Mine at all, and no, this isn't deja vu. I've said this for quite a few of these tracks, but I guess playing them all in quick succession over and over again for 100 hours really put into perspective which tracks worked for me and which ones didn't. Before, I didn't like this one because I thought that the whole outside part was boring and you were just waiting to get inside, but by the time you actually got inside, you were bored again and now you were just waiting to get back outside. But now I've kind of had a change of heart. I don't really know what made me think either of these parts were boring, because now I always have so much fun here. This outside part has this absolutely beautiful sunset, a sunset, Nintendo, and you can look down at all of these cliffside houses, which kind of just looks like Castle in the Sky now that I'm thinking about it. Whatever the case, I think that putting a track in a cool setting can make a pretty basic concept work a lot better, because the truth is, this outside part ain't that complicated. It's just wooden floors, and one part happens to go down and go back up for some reason. Not sure what the mining reason for that is, but it's there. But I can still enjoy myself tricking off these ramps to jump over these corners while listening to Wario go absolutely insane on the banjo. I assume it's Wario himself. It's definitely a unique sound for a track like this, but it surprisingly works. and the inside part is just great. Using anti-gravity here to make these twisty minecart rails twist in all 3 dimensions is a great idea, and it makes everything feel super off-kilter. And to top it all off, there's this split path at the end, just to add a little bit more. I honestly don't know what I was on when I thought that this track was just boring the whole way through, because it's honestly the exact opposite. Exciting the whole way through. Sunshine Airport is one of the most famous tracks in this game, and for good reason. It's awesome, except for the random part in the middle where they put a random metal strip in the sky. You know, that famous metal strip in the sky that all airports have. All of the aspects of this airport flow super well. The airport terminal where you start has so much detail that I don't know if anyone has seen all of it. Having to dodge packages that are being shipped across the road is such a cool idea, and driving through this plane from wing to wing will never not be fun for me. The colors are so bright and happy, and the music just makes this place feel like the most whimsical place on Earth. The only thing really wrong with this track is, like I said before, the giant metal strip in the sky. It's almost more insulting to smack anti-gravity on this also, because none is needed. There's a slight incline, and then a slight decline, and like, it's not annoying to drive on, and this is another spot where I can try and fill the glider vector to my heart's content, you know, and that's always nice. But come on, if you've ever been on a plane before, you've waited in a long-ass line at an airport, and you know firsthand how much there is to offer at an airport. Some more shops and restaurants and stuff inside would have been cool, but I was thinking more of a Toy Story 2 type package area with conveyor belts going every which way. I don't know if it would work, but I feel like with anti-gravity it could be cool. It doesn't even really matter what it is, because it's gotta be more creative than what we got, but even still, one uncreative part doesn't eliminate the value of all of the creative parts that are absolutely present here, unless you're Sunset Wilds to a lot of people. I'll play this track any day to look at the bright blue sky and be amazed at a course where neon green grass and orange roads don't mean perfectly smooth surfaces with no detail to be seen. Truly troublesome. Did I use that right? I haven't used that. I barely even remember. Did it? I don't know. Everything I just said about Sunshine Airport is true for Shy Guy Falls also, but even better. The graphics here are some of the best in the whole game, with so much detail in the grass and in the road. The anti-gravity is super creative, and instead of being used to just go in a circle in the sky, here you go up a waterfall, then you turn around and go straight back down another one. I mean, as a kid I didn't even realize that's what it was, because the camera always makes it really difficult to realize what direction you're driving, and you have to like focus on the background, which you're not usually doing. The music is this weird combination of banjos, whistles, and violins, and apparently it's based off of Andean music, which I guess makes some level of sense, and it's somehow so fitting with the concept of... Well, that's the other thing. I think that the little areas where you can see the Shy Guys mining for diamonds and stuff are really cute, but the truth is, for most of this track, you really can't even see any real theme. It's just some weird floating island towering over a rainforest, which is something else I didn't notice until I started looking at the backgrounds. It does make this end part kind of uninteresting, but for the majority of the track though, it really doesn't matter. It's the highest track in A- tier for a reason. Even though most of it is just brown roads and some grass, I always have a lot of fun playing it. At this point, I'm kind of running out of positive adjectives I can use without being super repetitive. Point is, it's good. But wait, did I say the best track in A- tier? Well, I wonder what that could mean. Could it perhaps mean a new tier? A tier, and normal A tier this time. Fire. A+ tier won't be that big at all, and you'll see why when we get there, and S tier is saved for the ones that I really love and I think capture the heart of this game the most, which means that a lot of the tracks we haven't done yet end up here. I can't say I have any real emotional connection to them, but I haven't really had any bad memories while playing them ever. Starting off with one so forgettable to most people you probably haven't even realized it hasn't come up yet. So I used to play Mario Kart Tour a lot on bus rides home from school back in like 2019, and then I didn't play it ever again until like 3 months ago when I randomly reopened it just to see what was going on there. And the first track I saw scared me. It looked exactly like the version of it from the Booster Course Pass. It was almost an exact copy and paste, but somehow the track was still so solid that it's this high in their ranking. That track is Shroom Ridge. This course is iconic for a reason. Even if it kind of looks like it came from a mobile game, because it did, everything else about it is literally so perfect that it doesn't even matter. As I've said hundreds, maybe thousands of times in this video, I couldn't care less about graphics as long as the track has something else going for it, and Shroom Ridge has everything going for it. For one, this layout is perfect. It just feels like you're on a road trip, and every part of it is distinct from the last. First, you're on this cliffside, which is a cool way to start a track. Then we have the worst turn in the entire game, where the road just completely falls away and you immediately crash into the far wall, but we don't talk about that. And then this back half is just a long straightaway through this meadow where you can just breathe, and I like that. Then there's a tunnel, which is always nice, and then you're back to the cliffside. Except for that one, there are just so many cool turns, and it's just so fun driving along this winding road and trying to dodge cars that actually present a challenge now because the road isn't like a quarter-mile wide like in Toad's Turnpike. And I love the catchy electronic music. Not only is it an absolute jam, but apparently it's in the key of A-flat, which is weird because it's like the least common key ever. Yeah, the track looks like I made it, and yeah, it has a turn that looks like I designed it, but you know what? I see through all of that. I can tell what an amazing track Shroom Ridge is beyond all of the garbage, and that's why no matter how many times I look at this perfectly flat and detailless field, and no matter how many times I slam into this wall so hard my soul leaves my body and I enter the digital circus, I will never not enjoy myself playing it. And yes, I was trying to find a way to work a digital circus reference in there, because at the time I'm saying this, it's just come out. I thought it was pretty good, the characters were interesting I guess, I like Pomni, the concept worked, it was able to work in internet things without being super cringe, although some of the jokes did make me kind of wince a little bit. The music is pretty good, the animation is actually surprisingly good, the ending is somehow still sort of impactful despite being memed into oblivion, it gets a 7 out of 10, consider that my review, but for the love of God, stop talking about it now. LED Motorways is way better of a name than Music Park. Anyway, it's no surprise why this one is ranked so high. It's just so full of creativity, and pretty much every single music-related thing you can possibly think of is probably in here somewhere. Just the 3 different piano bridges that go up or down the notes as you drive alone makes this course like at least a 7 out of 10. But we also simultaneously have these dancing piranha plants, trampolines that look like drums, this classic section with the giant music notes that bounce in time with the music, which are so cute by the way, and I love seeing them as the audience at the start of the track, and there are just so many more cool details sprinkled around. Before it even begins, you can already see the neck of a guitar, a couple of horns, and some speakers, the borders being this white glowing music staff that produces music notes when you bump into it, is probably one of my favorite details in any track here. If I had one complaint, it would be that I really don't like the color scheme of this track. Don't get me wrong, nothing really fits the theme of a track full of music stuff more than a concert hall, but dark orange has got to be one of the worst colors, I'm sorry. The weird sickly orange thing is the same issue I had with Sweet Sweet Canyon, and even though I don't exactly know what they could have done to fix it here, I just don't exactly love looking at this track. I love looking at the things in it, but just not it. Does that make sense? And obviously the track is still great, and I always have fun when playing it, but it's just a bit too dark for my liking, and so I never really picked this track first. Boo, Maple Treeway sucks. It's nowhere near as good as the original. Listen, pal, I don't know a single thing about the original. I only know about this version, and I'm ranking this version. And you know what? I like this version. I like how this track just feels like fall, from the color scheme to the music to just everything. I'm really glad they decided to try in the graphics in this track, because even though it probably would have been fine without them, with them, it looks so much better. The grass on this outside part doesn't look the greatest, but the ground absolutely does, and the leaves all over the place totally make up for a slightly smooth green border. And say what you want, but I think the wood actually looks great. There's honestly quite a bit of detail in the grain of the wood, or at the very least, enough that I can very clearly notice. This is one of the only tracks where I think the color orange actually looks good, and the shot where you go through the cannon and zoom toward the giant tree is amazing. The layout is actually pretty good too, and they somehow managed to make it seem like the branches of a tree while not being strictly limited to the shapes of branches of a tree. There are still straightaways and huge open areas, but it still fits perfectly tucked into this huge-ass tree. I'm not sure why there's a giant flower with wigglers in this tree, and I'm not sure why there are these houses with these beautiful blue roofs in this tree, and I'm not sure why the hollowed-out tree trunk reminds me of this room in The Incredibles for some reason, in this tree, but it seriously all works. The music is absolutely perfect, and not only does it feel like fall, but all of the instruments work together so perfectly. I really don't care if they replaced the net bridge with a glider section, or if they absolutely ruined the view that I think looks pretty much perfect anyway. Maple Treeway, to me, is still an amazing track, and hey, that's pretty much all that I want. The very first thing I said when I played Mvmt for the first time was, wow, That's a really nice floor. And to be honest, my opinion on this track hasn't really changed much since then. If you look at every single thing I've said about what does and doesn't make city tracks work in this game, you'll probably be kind of confused at why this one ended up so high, because it basically follows 0 of those rules. A lot of the streets look very similar, it's way too easy to get turned around, it's pretty closely packed, and a lot of the variation they threw in just involves you leaving the main city and taking a couple of turns in some random grassy area with some trees. So it's kind of crazy to think about it spot in A tier, when it shares a lot of pretty damning characteristics with tracks like London Loop, although obviously nowhere near as bad. So obviously there's something else going on here that makes up for it. But what is that? It's just that Mvmt has one of the best vibes of any track in this game, and I'm perfectly aware of how shallow and subjective of an answer this is, but you know what? This is my ranking. I've given you most of the realistic criticism already, so now I have free reign to talk about how the ambiance of this track feels expertly designed just to make me happy. The nighttime aesthetic works perfectly here. If you were wondering during the New York Minute segment what an actually good nighttime city track would look like, this is it. I mean, Vancouver Velocity does it too, but like, this one does it even better. There are no flat, featureless buildings with neon bright squares as the only light sources. Now, light comes from lanterns and stuff like that, so everything feels way softer and more welcoming, more natural. The whole city kind of reminds me of the North Pole from the Polar Express, which might seem like a weird comparison, and it is, and yet it was still one of the very first things I thought about this track. There's one road in particular that feels so strongly like a road in the Polar Express that I swear Santa Claus himself had to have manifested this into the game. And obviously this wouldn't work nearly as well if it weren't for the graphics. It took Nintendo long enough to bring the details back up to base 8 level, and thank God they did, because if this wasn't by far the best looking city track, all of the weird reasons I like it would melt away and it would be so much worse. But at the very least, they've been consistent with the music throughout, and honestly, the music is what ties everything together here, like it always does in tracks where the vibe is its main selling point. If the nice looking floor was the first thing I thought about this track, the fact that this song literally sounds straight out of Kiki's Delivery Service was probably the second thing. If you gave me a sample of that accordion section before Wave 6 actually came out and then said, this is from the scene in Kiki's Delivery Service where so-and-so happened, I would instantly believe you. I do get that Mvmt's spot in the ranking is pretty fragile, considering that the thing that actually makes me like it is the fact that it reminds me of 2 unrelated movies that I just so happen to think are very good. But hey, for now it goes here, and at least no matter what happens, my ranking will still be better than Nathaniel Bandy's. That man put Coconut Mall second. Dragon Driftway really feels like Nintendo thought they had something to prove, because they went so hard on this track, but it totally paid off. I said that Electrodrome is the second best use of anti-gravity in the game, and this is the first. It isn't even close. What other track do you drive in pretty much every single direction to the point where in some places you can just look up and see a different part of the track? I mean, I know, like I said, I forgot about the F-Zero one, so Electrodrome is like 4th best then, but this one is still best. They were basically like, we want a twisty-turny track that lets people pull off some of the most satisfying drifts ever, so what's something that's twisty and turny? And then they put the whole track on the back of a dragon, and then they made the dragon Gobbledygook or whatever his name was from that one game, and then they went ahead and made an entire Chinese-inspired mythological land, all based around this beautifully designed, amazingly creative idea. Listen, this Lakitu statue alone would be a huge example of creativity in any other track, but here it's just one of like 100 things that gives this track so much personality, like how the inside of the dragon is just these cool murals. And the music is just epic. Did you know that that instrument in this song is called an erhu? Well, now you do, and it just adds to the feel even more. Even though the track itself is kind of just boring white floors, literally everything else all around you has so much life that it absolutely makes up for it. And maybe I should draw your attention to the fact that this is only the second Egg Cup track we've done, and the first one was Excite Bike Arena at number 95, so we've still got half of this cup left. Grumble Volcano is one of the best examples of a hard track that's actually fair in its challenges and uses them in really cool ways. Don't get me wrong, volcanoes are cool anyway, and the orange sky and the lava ocean and these cute little fireballs that hop around, and even the color of the ground, all work together to make a super dire feeling anyway. But you know what would make it even more dire? The track literally falling apart before your eyes as the laps go on. At the beginning, you can drive through this cave and around this flatter area no problem, but now that you've seen it once, that's all you get, and your margin for error completely vanishes, and a single misstep sends you straight into the lava. But if you know how, it's easy to avoid, and I play on this track plenty of times without falling in. I don't remember if my footage has me falling in or not, so that could be unintentionally funny, but it's still a really cool challenge that just makes things more interesting. And I'm impressed how much variety they were able to pack into this track that's basically just a bunch of rocks. like how in the cave the road splits into an upper path and a lower path, and then you hop between these floating islands, and then you glide over and see this view of everything you're about to drive through. And this flat area at the end I guess could be seen as boring, but it's not even that long. And just in case anyone did think that, Nintendo threw in multiple paths here too. I don't know, I think that trying to find the right path out is a cool thing to add into a track that's currently being destroyed by an active volcano. Even the music adds to the panic. A xylophone is kind of a perfect sound for the sort of calm before the storm feel that the start of this song has, and knowing this game, of course they bring in the guitar for the main part, and to no one's shock, it sounds perfect. This was always one I just acknowledged as a kid, but now I can clearly see how great it really is. Listen, I've explained my thoughts on how to make a Rainbow Road track many times at this point, and I'm not gonna say it again. Even though I prefer Rainbow Roads that try to be a finale, Nitro Rainbow Road is still in the top quarter of the list or something like that, and it's there for a reason. Would I prefer it if it wasn't a final gauntlet? Probably, but what an amazing final gauntlet this is. It really proves that my personal Rainbow Road preference really is just a preference, because this track does work. Sure, it could have been more. I know that with anti-gravity, people were expecting some insane curves that defy all laws of physics and practically enter the fourth dimension, and what we ended up getting isn't exactly that, and the muted technological sort of colors they went for pretty much got rid of any finality that this track had, because without bright vivid colors, without a rainbow, if you will, it kind of stops being a Rainbow Road in a way. If you need some sort of analogy, it's like if there's a track where like the main theme was like a sunset and then they got rid of the sunset or something, you know, it's kind of like that, you know? I do like the space station idea, and I think it could have worked, even though I have no clue what this huge central thing is here. It adds a little bit of something extra to a track that desperately needs it in a lot of places, because even though this track can be really challenging and has some of the tightest turns in the game, I hate to say it, but what else does it have? I mean, the music is good, and I love pulling off or trying to pull off this one shortcut, but without the bright colors or a super engaging concept, let's just say it's a good thing that they were able to make this one difficult. Because even though it's still a good track, and I like it way more than like 90% of Mario Kart players probably, without its challenge, it would legitimately have nothing. That's a more grim tone than I was expecting to have this high up the list. Well, if it makes you feel any better, the next one will be exclusively positive, but it probably won't make you feel any better, because the next one is... Yep, I mean it. Neo Bowser City is actually good. I'm sorry, but I think it's good. I was a firm hater of this track like the rest of you. I thought that the turns were too unfair, and I came to fear the dreaded S-bend that surely meant certain death. As I was playing it for this video, though, I kinda realized something. Pretty much everything else about this track, other than the fact that I suck at it, is good. For one, it looks awesome. I love the concept of a dystopian future where Bowser wins or something like that, and it nails the nighttime Coruscant look perfectly, with all of the lights of all colors and the billboards and just all the little futuristic details that make this track so perfect. And sure, the rain makes the track more difficult, but it makes the vibe so much cooler. This city feels so incredibly full, and I feel like I could wander around it for hours, and every single part of this track is like a different part of this city. There's literally a section where we drive through a tunnel that like hover buses drive through or something. How cool is that? And the music does something really interesting where it takes previous songs and recontextualizes them, which I think is really cool and fitting for a track that's basically in the future. You can hear Toad's Circuit, the Mario Kart 7 title theme, Toad's Turnpike, even Luigi's Circuit, but the little snippets of these songs all blend together so well, and it makes a piece of music that sounds vaguely familiar but still doesn't feel quite right, like something has been changed, not in a haunting way or anything, but just in a generally noticeable way. And again, for a track like this, that's literally perfect. So I was thinking about all of this as I played the track, right? And I was like, I feel like if I actually knew how to take the turns on this track, I could probably like it a lot. So I spent like half an hour time trialing it, and here we are. Listen, I know just as well as anyone else how miserable it is falling off the edge of this S-bend over and over and over again, and I'm sure if I raced this track on 200cc instead of 150, I'd still be doing it. But damn it, when you can pull it off consistently, this track is actually really fun, and I am now a certified enjoyer of Neo Bowser City. I really encourage you to do a few time trials of this one, because it's not like the challenges are totally unfair, and they can genuinely be overcome if you know how. And so I ask you to take another look at this track, because it's actually really great. Berlin Byways is just surprisingly fun to play for me, probably because it focuses less on being a city and more on being a generally populated area. Most of the skyscrapers are relegated to the background so that the foreground can be filled with tons of cool details, and this is different from Sydney Sprint that relegates the city to the background and puts nothing in the foreground. Actually, putting cars on the streets makes everything so much more interesting, and the whole thing is so open that you can never really get lost. There's so much variation and pretty much nothing repeats. You go through a train station, through a park that actually has trees and isn't just a flat piece of lime green concrete, past the Berlin Wall. It's kind of a weird thing to throw in, but the fact that parts of it fall down and you can trick off of them is pretty fun. It's not even like the track looks that good. Most textures are pretty plain and don't have a lot of detail, and these trees certainly don't look like any trees I've ever seen, but visually, this track absolutely delivers. Green, blue, and beige gives this course a really nice color palette, and combined with the subtle changes in elevation throughout the race, it really does feel like you're racing through an actual city, which many other city tracks cannot and do not do. I love the part where the highway cuts straight through this hill, just because it's a random unique thing that they put in to make this section a little bit less boring. And the music is really perfect too. Somehow it manages to transition from electronic head-bouncing music to sweeping majestic Queen of England orchestra music so perfectly, and it's just the cherry on top to an already perfect track. Every passing second, it's always something new, and it's all honestly pretty good. If you don't like Berlin Byways, I do not understand you. I mean, I'd like to, but I definitely don't right now, because I don't think I've ever experienced a negative emotion on this track. I honestly can't believe I forgot about Mute City earlier, because this takes the huge, expansive, futuristic city of Neo Bowser City and the wild anti-gravity of Dragon Driftway, and smushes them together to get one of the highest energy tracks in the game. I don't think I need to explain why chaining together like 500 speed boosts as we snake our way around this entire colorful, creative world, driving over these weird technological pads to get coins, slowly gliding down toward the finish line as the music swells, is just amazing. If you've ever played this track before, you know. I'm not even sure if anyone actually dislikes this track, so instead, I'm just going to spend this time talking about the vehicle stat changes, because this seems like a good opportunity to do it. This track was literally 6 days away from having a 1,000-day world record on it when Wave 4 came out and buffed every single character and cart that wasn't part of the current time trial combo, eliminating thousands of hours of work for dozens of people who have dedicated their whole lives to whittling down the times for this game as much as possible. That's literally one of the worst ideas ever, because if you're trying to stop the meta combo from being the meta combo, you can't just change things around a little bit, because then there's still gonna be a meta combo, and once people figure out what it is, the only thing that will have changed is the complete deletion of all of the accomplishments people have made on this game in the last 6 years. I figured I should probably mention this at some point, and what better place to do it than on the track most affected, especially since the track itself is so obviously good that I basically have nothing to say. Alberto, I dedicate this video to you. Alberto is this world record guy who has literally 1,500 world records on this game. So, yeah, this video is for you. Somehow Madrid Drive feels more Spanish than Paris Promenade felt French, and that energy continues through the entire track. I can't believe that Tour went out on such a surprisingly high note after its 4-year reign of terror on the mortal world. It really isn't my very favorite city track, but I'm still really impressed with how many of the infamous issues that accompany them just aren't even present here at all. Just like with Mvmt, the first thing I noticed when I played this track was, wow, that's a really nice floor. And yeah, the fact that I can tell that the floor is basalt, or at least something like that, shows a level of detail that waves 1, 2, and 3 never really came close to reaching. And even though I would have liked the buildings themselves to have a bit more detail, the architecture is great, and all of the statues everywhere are a pretty cool inclusion. The track is also kind of the culmination of Nintendo's ability to add variety into the city courses. They managed to make the city seem interesting without relying on ever having to leave it, making sure that we still actually got some stuff just on normal roads every single lap. But those sections are separated by some super cool areas. This train station, this art museum that looks like it's based off of Super Mario 64, where one of the paintings has come to life and is actively trying to eat you, this little market, this giant football stadium, and of course, this town square. This town square is one of my favorite areas in any city track, not just because of the shortcut you can do through the cafe tables, not just because of the Wiggler sleeping in the middle, and not just because of the super cool floor design, but because of all of those things. This track just has good pacing, and there's no other way to describe it. It knows when to introduce a new area, when to bring out a slightly less populated grassy section without totally relying on them like the earlier city tracks, and when to just transition back into some calmer, normal roads. And the music, oh my god, the music! You can obviously tell that the Paris Promenade song is depicting France, but the fact that this song isn't like the epitome of overly stereotypical music makes it just that much better. They went out of their way to make an entire harp version of this song that we hear for like 5 seconds in the art museum, and then they went out of their way to make an entire choir version of this song that we hear for like 5 seconds in the football stadium. And that honestly kinda sums up the sheer perfection that is Madrid Drive. But there are still some city tracks that I like even better. Like this one, for example. I'm honestly shocked how much Bangkok Rush grew on me. I didn't exactly hate it at first, but I certainly didn't think as highly of it as I do now. The truth is, this is a pretty unique city course, and one of the only ones that makes a mostly cramped layout actually work. For one, this track takes place at sunset. A sunset! Whoa, that sounds like a really cool setting for a track, Nintendo! What a great idea! Anyway, it's pretty cool and adds a little bit of variety, and the music is absolutely top tier, nothing like I've ever heard before. The flute solos and the trumpet parts and just the whole thing makes such a unique sound, and the layout is honestly really good too. There isn't a single part that repeats, and the entire thing is just teeming with so much creativity. In this track, we drive through canals where we can trick off boats. I think Amsterdam Drift probably should have done something like this. We glide past giant monuments, we bounce on the cloth ceilings of market stalls. Even the architecture adds to the atmosphere and the charm of this course, and the fact that the most boring part is going under this highway overpass that we can just choose to ignore by driving up these stairs says pretty much all you need to know about how great this track really is. Every time I play this track, I like it a little bit more. They put these little shortcuts in the corners if you want to save a bit of time at the risk of bumping into the walls. They put a surprising amount of graphical detail into pretty much everything. There's this one straightaway, so to make it more interesting, they put a bunch of boost panels down, and in case it still wasn't cool enough, then they just threw in some crabs. There isn't just variety between the laps, but variety within the lap that lets you kind of choose your own path, presenting you with cool obstacles that force you to make decisions about how you'll tackle them, and that's something I think this track does best, by far. Bowser Castle 3 is one of only 2 Bowser's Castles in this game, and it's the better one by a lot, and I'm not sure which of those is most impressive. The era of insane Super Circuit remakes is out, and the era of insane Super Mario Kart remakes is in. This is what this track looked like originally, and you know perfectly well that if this was a Wave 1 or 2 course, it would look exactly like that still. Flat gray stones floating on a never-ending flat plane of flat lava. But not only did they go and make the background more vertical, but they also made the track itself more vertical. Driving up a lava waterfall and then slowly going back down to the starting elevation over the course of the track is such a simple change that adds so much. The variety of obstacles we face means that there's never a dull moment. There's even variety within the individual obstacles where there are multiple paths you can take to get to the next section. Pretty much exactly like Bangkok Rush, actually. Obviously, this lava waterfall area is the best example. You can go on the inside and risk getting killed by this geyser. You can go on the far outside to get some extra coins, or you can be content where you are and take the middle path. And with this section a little bit later, you have the option to drive on top of these walls, which is just so cool. The graphics are fantastic, and the colors make everything seem super dangerous. There's this area between these 2 curtains of lava where fireballs are flying through the air, except there's no way to get hit by them, which means they're only there to look cool. That pretty much sums up how hard Nintendo went on this one. Also, that lava curtain area reminds me of that one area in The Incredibles. If I had a nickel for every time I've said that sentence in this video, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? The music isn't the greatest, but literally every other aspect of this course feels so intense that it's always so much fun to play on. Doesn't even feel like a Super Mario Kart course. And I'd say something like, not in the sense that Super Mario Kart courses are inherently bad and this one is good, except that's exactly the sense I mean it in, and I'm not even gonna lie to you about that. But that's a good thing. That game was revolutionary for the time, but if you want to bring them back, you're gonna need to make some improvements so that they hold up. And that's exactly what Bowser Castle 3 did. And why is this one called Bowser Castle and not Bowser's Castle? Weird, right? One of the coolest parts of Moonview Highway is that literally no one expected it. We were slated for one more Mario Kart Wii track, and everyone knew it would be that game's Rainbow Road, but then this masterpiece showed up too, and I love it. It's ironic that this feels more like a city course than like the majority of the actual city courses. This shot of downtown that you get when you go through the toll booth is one of the best shots in the game, and I love the contrast between this half of the track and the first half. It starts off less populated with more blue lighting, and there isn't as much challenge. The only things really of note are these really cool and non-intrusive shortcuts that I never would have found if it weren't for YouTube. There aren't a lot of cars, and it's just super chill. The only high-energy thing is the music, and it's definitely up there with Ninja Hideaway as one of the best. Then we turn a corner and see this red bridge with the lights of the city in the background. So now there's a little bit more orange and a little bit less blue, which goes along with the increasing excitement. Then you hit the speed boost. All of the blue turns to orange. There are things to look at everywhere. Speed boosts are all over the place. Item boxes are flying every which way. If you get distracted, you can run into one of these bomb cars, which realistically aren't any different from regular cars because they all cause you to spin out, but are still really cool. The music turns from EDM to like jazz, which is just another cool detail. This is the highest energy part of the course, with the highest energy colors, obstacles, you name it. Then we go into this tunnel, and even though a lot of the obstacles from before are still here, along with some added ones in the form of these pillars, the colors go back down to some darker blues and purples, which serves as a nice transition back into the more mellow beginning. I absolutely love Moonview Highway for how every single piece of it flows and fits together perfectly. No matter how many times I go around this one corner near the start and immediately smash into a car that I had no way of seeing, I doubt that I'll ever have a bad experience playing this track. On the topic of bad experiences though, check this out. The quality is so bad because I use the instant replay thing, but I feel like I need to show you this. So I get this bomb and I'm like, I don't want this, so I throw it and... what are these physics, bro? And the funniest part is, the very next lap I did the exact same thing. Anyway, awesome track, 10 out of 10. Are all of the tracks after this 10 out of 10? I don't know. People hate Los Angeles laps for literally no reason. A genuine criticism I heard about this track is that you can't see the Hollywood sign. So how are we even supposed to know it's even Los Angeles at all? How are we even supposed to like it? What? How about everything else? I mean, except for the random oil field they put in the middle of the track, which, yeah, is really dumb and shouldn't exist. Other than that, this track is almost perfect. I love the vibrant colors of the sand and the ocean and the sky and the buildings. It's probably not accurate to California, but listen, I'd rather have an actual fun track to race on than a bunch of narrow streets clogged with standstill traffic because it's accurate that way. Every single part of this course is distinct. The first lap is mainly focused on the coast, so we drive on a boardwalk, along the beach, and then start making our way into the city. What's interesting is that even though the second lap is all city, they make every part of it unique. We have like 2 cramped-ish turns, and then we fly over the stadium, which is definitely not to scale, but is a cool way of breaking things up. By the way, another criticism I heard about this track is the fact that the coins are sideways here. And yeah, I absolutely agree. After all, no other track has this, so this track can't even be allowed to. Truly terrible. Then we have a more open area, and to add some variety to the end of the lap, we have this cool raised area with a blue building and a yellow building, and then a straightaway. And even though the oil field is an objectively stupid idea, I hate to say it, but it does technically add variety that the rest of the third lap definitely has less of than the first 2. In general though, there's definitely a lot that I like here. Maybe the in-city stuff isn't as good as the out-of-city stuff, but as a whole, I think it's pretty fun, and I like how weird the music sounds. Vocals of a bunch of random dudes like in the original probably would have been weirder, and I probably would have preferred it that way, but I still think it fits the way it is. Although I do get it if this is a track you don't really like, it works for me, but it definitely doesn't work for everyone. And as long as you're not hung up on these sideways coins or the lack of Hollywood sign being the sole things ruining this course for you, I can totally see where you're coming from. I think Yoshi Circuit is the track that I like driving on in this game the most. I mean, the Yoshi-shaped layout means they probably didn't design the turns in this track with fun entirely in mind, but A, it doesn't matter because it's fun anyway, and B, the Yoshi shape is a cool idea and I'd still stand by this track even if it sucked to drive on. I can't say I have a list of my top 10 favorite turns in the game, because that's kind of a strange thing to have a list on, but if I did, I feel like half of them would be on this track, like coming out of this tunnel and jumping over this first piranha plant, or tricking off this one ramp right after and flying like 50 feet forward, or this waterfall shortcut which I never get to use but is so fun when I do. And when you can string everything together like in time trials, it just makes you feel like the most powerful entity in the world. This being an island really eliminates a lot of the standard circuit sameness, because one side of the road is a wall, and the other is the ocean, so they could put all of their effort into details right by the road. And you can tell because there are so many cool things packed into this pretty basic idea. The music is pretty standard, but the graphics are probably the best in the entire game, and I'm not even kidding. What else do I even need to say? If you've ever played Yoshi Circuit, you know. You know how perfect this track looks, you know how many different segments it has, with each one being just as good as the last, and you know how much fun this track is to play. Every single time. Yoshi Circuit is an amazing course, and everyone knows it. I'm not sure what it is about the boring, dimly lit tunnels of Super Bell Subway that I like so much, but somehow it's in the top 20, so I don't know. There's just something really fun about driving on these catwalks, avoiding the trains, and just existing on this track that I can't really put my finger on. The subway station feels a lot like the airport terminal in Sunshine Airport with how much detail is packed into every corner, and it's a really good spot to start and end the track. Tricking up those stairs to finish off every lap is always so much fun, and the music is really weird but somehow fits. It's one of the only times I've ever heard an accordion not make its presence known to the entire audience immediately while holding a flaming sign saying, "This song now sounds French," and the bass line being the Super Mario Underground theme is pretty creative, and the actual melody is just really relaxing. I really don't know, because a lot of this track is just walls and floor, and by all means I should absolutely hate it. After everything we've seen today, it's pretty clear that Super Bell Subway's basic idea with almost no variety should absolutely plummet its ranking. But I don't know, it's just got some charm that makes these dark corridors genuinely entertaining. DK Mountain is like DK Summit, except it actually looks good, and it doesn't totally rely on a broken mechanic not at all designed for this game. At least now I can sort of get why some people like DK Summit though. Not the version in this game, no. People only like that one because of nostalgia. That version is terrible. I mean the original version, because both of them have the general premise of getting shot through a cannon to the top of the mountain and then racing back down, and now I actually have proof that that concept isn't fundamentally flawed. I'm honestly surprised by how much I like this track, because like, look at this upper rocky part of the mountain. Apart from a couple of ramps, there's literally nothing here, so why do I still have so much fun every single time I trick off one of them? Then the rest of the track is just turning left and right over and over again. Nothing special except for some easily avoidable falling boulders, so why is it still so satisfying to pull off these turns? Maybe it has something to do with the honestly amazing graphics. Like, we're straight up at base 8 levels now. It's been a long road to get back here, but we're definitely here now and it sure pays off. You might have guessed that one of the first things I thought when I played this track for the first time was, wow, that's a nice floor. And you would have guessed correctly. It's entirely possible that the graphics are what make everything click here. Or maybe it has something to do with the song, which sounds straight out of Tropical Freeze. I don't know if that's intentional because they're both Donkey Kong things, but the xylophones and especially the African pan flute made me think of the Bright Savannah the very first time I played this track. So maybe the song is what makes me like this one so much. Or it could be one of the cool details like the wavy bridge or the gap jump, which is actually somewhat possible for an average person like me to pull off in an actual race. It could be the bright colors of the volcano and the foliage, but the real reason why I like DK Mountain so much is much more simple. It's all of those things combined. Even without the graphics and the visuals and the music, we'd still have a pretty acceptable track, but every new thing just made every other thing even better, and when the dust settled, we were left with one of the most perfect tracks in the entire game. I'd explain how tremendous of an accomplishment it is for a course to make it into the top 20, but after spending this long seeing all of the amazing tracks that couldn't, you pretty much get it. I really wanted to hate Yoshi's Island when it came out. I wasn't gonna let the excitement of a new track affect my opinion on how actually good it was, but like 10 months later, I have to concede that this track does in fact slap, and there's honestly nothing wrong with it. I used to hate the fact that we get to see all of these cool looking areas but barely get to explore any of them, namely this forest section which we don't explore at all and only even see for like 2 seconds. But like, considering the fact that this track was one of the ones based off of a whole game, it's actually pretty impressive that the design they came up with for it showcases as much of the game as it does. And it's not like the layout is bad or anything, it's actually really great. If you think about it, you kind of realize that every single part of this track is on an incline, whether it's slowly driving upward or gliding or falling downward. Everything is so dynamic and all of these different areas blend together so well, making this beautiful, colorful wonderland. And honestly, the fact that we don't get to explore a lot of it just makes it seem even bigger. There's so much creativity in every single one of these areas, and even though I've never played Yoshi's Island and never will, and I know nothing about it, I can still just tell how much from the game they managed to work in. Even the music is great, remixing the athletic theme from that game, and it sounds really, really good. Yoshi's Island is one of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's best nitro tracks. And that's precisely why I want this game to finally die. This is why I held off on forming an opinion for so long. I knew this course's quality had the potential to make or break Mario Kart forever. And that might sound dramatic, and it is, because this is a YouTube video and that's what we do here, but I'm not actually, it's not actually as dramatic as you might think. Any more DLC we get for this game is obviously going to be focused on remaking tracks from the previous games, and Yoshi's Island shows that Nintendo still got it, and since we know they can, I kind of want them to move on and start making new stuff again. You know, the way this is supposed to work. This game is already the 6th best-selling game of all time, so just make Mario Kart X already. People are gonna buy it. And I'd rather have some more cool new tracks than another Mario circuit course. Oh yeah, and add Shy Guy Lumber Company to the next game. Best custom track ever. But Yoshi's Island is still a great track nonetheless. That's the main point we should take away from this. In fact, it might even be the best in A tier. But prithee, could that mean a new tier? Why yes, it could mean that. Well, it's time for A+ tier, and it only has 4 courses in it, so it's time for some deep lore real quick. In my Every Animated Movie Ranked series, I've mentioned a couple of times how ranking the old Christmas movies alongside the others doesn't really work a lot of the time because of how much shorter and just how different in general they are than the rest of the movies, and the same is true here. There are a couple of courses in this game that I love playing, not because of their cool themes or anything like that, but because of the pure happiness they exude all the time. Which is why I'm calling it A+ tier, whimsical. This whole video I've been saying that a track with nothing else going for it needs to look great, and even though some of these do have other things going for them, they're nevertheless the ones who carry this out the best. Anyway, that's a lot of explaining for 4 courses, so let's just start. Starting with Moo Moo Meadows. It's definitely the worst of these 4, but don't let that fool you. The fact that it's here at all should tell you all you need to know about how whimsical this track really is. I'm gonna be using that adjective a lot because there really isn't a better one. This track is definitely an early game track, and there isn't exactly any challenge, unless you consider these cows to be a challenge. Pretty much the whole appeal of it is how big of a glow up it got, because it's beautiful. The graphical upgrade this course has is way more than it had any right to, given that the whole thing takes like 90 seconds to complete, but it paid off. Sure, the most difficult part of this track is driving up this hill to get to the glider panel and just not falling off somehow, I don't know, but watching the sunset as you glide over this farm is just super relaxing, and the music helps with that too. I don't know why the fiddle went so hard here, but it totally works. For an early game track, this is honestly perfect. There aren't really that many obstacles, and you're barely even focused on staying on the road. It's physically impossible to drive off because the road is like 8 miles wide. You're just going along this peaceful dirt path, looking at the cows, looking at the windmill, vibing to the music, and just feeling calm. No one hates this track, let's be honest. People definitely hate Donut Plains 3 though, and sorry, but I really don't get it. This track is really pretty. The colors are pretty, the random blocks that they always throw in when they don't know what to do actually work, the trees honestly look great, there's this random castle outpost tower thingamajiggy, everything just feels so bright and happy. The music isn't as memorable as the music in the other 3 tracks in this tier, but it's not like it's bad at all. For a Super Mario Kart track, there was actually a shocking amount of effort put into making this one actually presentable, and I mean after Bowser's Castle 3, it doesn't really look as impressive, but it's still impressive. I mean, you can barely even tell that this is the same track as this, and that is absolutely a compliment. I like that in some spots the roads have like puddles on them to make them slippery or something. Did they actually make the road slippery? It doesn't matter, it's still a cool detail. And even though it's the easiest thing in the world to dodge these moles, timing it so you can trick off their little mounds is fun too. And obviously this river is the highlight of the track. Taking an obnoxious obstacle from the original and making it into a little area you can dip into for a second is really cool. I'm not really sure what it is about Donut Plains 3 that you guys hate so much. It feels like the whole thing was designed to be a fun time, and if I ever want to break from the ads to just chill, this is as good a track as any to do it. And don't get caught up on the fact that I technically have this as a better Super Mario Kart track than Bowser Castle 3. Again, this tier is here because the tracks in it can't really be compared to the other tracks, and this is just where I happen to put this tier. I'm not saying Donut Plains 3 is better than every track we've seen so far. I'm just saying that it's really cute, and I like it. Here we are, N64 Rainbow Road. The best Rainbow Road in the game, except for one other one. To be honest, I made this whimsical category just for this track. It's so good at being a finale that it basically transcends all reality. You can't not feel happy while driving around this colorful spiral over a colorful city, seeing colorful images of all of your opponents. Whether you've won or lost, this is a track that congratulates all of you on your journey. Even the music contributes to you feeling like you've earned this. You've bested every challenge. This is your victory lap. There's almost zero challenge here, and almost zero to talk about, and so it's no wonder why time trialers absolutely do not like playing on this one, but that's not the point of this track. You're not meant to play this track like 100 times in a row to drive it as fast as possible. It's just not what it's for. This whole time I've been talking about what it means to be a Rainbow Road. You can focus on challenge, sure, and that track can still be great. Again, there's another Rainbow Road after this, and that one's not a walk in the park. But there's a reason I prefer Rainbow Roads like this overall, and N64 Rainbow Road is that reason. There is no other track in this game, even the other Rainbow Road we still haven't done, that feels as fitting as this. It may not be the best, and it's certainly not my favorite, but what this course can accomplish is one of the most impressive things a game has ever done. And the funny part is, there's still one more Rainbow Road, and one more track in this tier. Okay, so the last 3 of these would not have worked at all if it weren't for their graphics, but for Riverside Park, that's just the icing on the cake to a track that already has so much. Let me tell you, I don't think anyone is more surprised than I am at how high I rank this track, but there's just something about it that makes it more whimsical than any of the other whimsical tier tracks, despite having almost nothing in common with any of them. The environment is just so beautiful, and I think this was the first time in the whole Booster Course Pass where we actually got base game-ish graphics, and it showed. Putting this track in a swamp, basically, had a pretty high chance of being kind of gross, but instead they put it at sunrise, and now it just looks amazing. Or how do we know it's sunrise? It could be sunset, although I highly doubt it's sunset because, you know, Nintendo famously doesn't really like those that much. The finish line being on this pier, the cool designs of the trees that almost make me forget the pain of losing the trees we used to have, this random cave they threw in at the end. This cave was not in the original because Super Circuit was a flat game. There were no caves. Instead of going in a circle and just jumping over the previous part of the track, instead, they put the whole thing inside of this cave with these blue mushrooms that reminds me a lot of that one Tropical Freeze level. So then the anticipation builds as you slowly drive upward until you fly through this waterfall and back onto the initial boardwalk. And to stop the rest of the track from feeling samey, they added these cool little piranha plants that walk around that you can snipe to get items, which is another awesome idea that they have just in this track. And the music is so jazzy for no reason, and it has this weird the good, the bad, and the ugly thing that keeps coming back, and the main theme itself, especially the bass part, really reminds me of Tropical Freeze 2. Maybe I just like this track so much because of how much it feels like a Tropical Freeze level. I never would have guessed that Riverside Park would be my favorite of the ridiculous Super Circuit remakes, especially because it's one of the least ridiculous. Well, one of them if you know what I mean. But here we are. What's even more interesting is that we only have 4 more tracks from the Booster Course Pass, although it's probably more now that Wave 6 came out, because I don't remember when I wrote this part of the script, but like, a lot of them are still from Wave 4. But whatever the case, Whimsical Tier is done. I told you, it wouldn't be that long. But you know what that means. A new tier. And the last tier. It's been a really long day, but we finally made it to the S tier tracks. Not necessarily the ones that I think are the best, but the ones that I love the most. These are the tracks that I have an emotional connection with. The tracks that I think embody what I adore about Mario Kart 8 Deluxe so much. The whimsical tracks I'll play to feel happy, but the feeling I get playing these surpasses even that. These are the tracks that make me feel like I'm at home. The tracks where the nostalgia cranks up to 11. Or the sheer amount of indescribable emotions I feel make me... I mean, there isn't really a word for it. Just like the movies I love the most, the tracks from this game that I love the most can't really be done justice by words. If you've ever loved a movie or a game, you kinda already know what I'm talking about here. And if you haven't, there's no way that any of us could possibly try to describe that. But that's exactly what I'm going to try to do right now anyway. Cheap Cheap Beach is a lot like your average whimsical track where how good it looks is its best quality, except this one looks so good that I just had to elevate it up to S tier. When I look at the bright blue water or this little pier section or these rocks or the little strips of beach or these fish or this jungle area, happy doesn't feel like strong enough of a word to describe just the beauty of everything. This jungle area specifically is the reason for that, because this is hands down, like, the best looking thing in the entire game. Every compliment I've ever given to the trees in the base game is like times 10 here. I could stare at these palm trees for hours. I mean, it probably wouldn't be very interesting, and I'd rather not, but I absolutely could, and I'd much rather stare at these trees for hours than the trees on, like, Rock Mountain, you know? Sure, a random rainforest in the middle of a beach isn't the most realistic, but it's just one extra thing that adds to one of the most colorful and eye-candy-ish tracks in the whole game. But why is the music so close to Daisy Cruisers, though? Again, this one, don't have much to say on it, it's just really nice looking, and I just so happen to like it a lot because of that. So all that stuff I just said about Cheep Cheep Beach is pretty much also true for Animal Crossing, except it has way better track design, and 4 variations. I love the seasons gimmick on this track, and even though the layout is varied enough that it would have been interesting anyway, with parts on the beach, in a meadow, by the town, making the course literally 4 different courses works really well. Summer is the worst because it's the most basic one, but even then it's still cool, and I like the little ramps in the beach section. Spring is next because the trees are cherry blossoms now, and pink is better than green, but it's really a toss-up between fall and winter. I like the way winter looks better, but the ice physics definitely detract a bit, so I'm gonna have to give it to fall. Either way though, none of these are bad, and even summer would make it into one of the A tiers, just like how Yoshi's Island and Hyrule Circuit feel like there was a ton of effort put in to make them true to the game. There are just so many cute details here that make this track so amazing. Apples fall from the trees that you can use as mushrooms, the coins are little... I don't know what these things are, it's like the little Crossing Cup logo, but I'm sure it has something to do with Animal Crossing, because again, it's the Crossing Cup logo. This glider section has item boxes floating on balloons, which is the coolest detail ever, and the music is so perfect. The fall one is good, but the normal version is just great, and the winter cover of it is just one of the most, I don't know, what's a good word? Evocative? I think that's what that means. It's one of the most evocative songs in the game. Even the custom one that plays at the end is fantastic, and my sister and I have always been impressed at how it sounds both happy and sad, and depending on how you did in the race, you can interpret it as either. It's fun, it's cute, it's pretty, it's Animal Crossing. Just like how Animal Crossing takes everything Cheep Cheep Beach did well and made it better, Singapore Speedway takes everything Bangkok Rush did well and made it better. And also takes everything every city track did and made it better. This is literally the perfect city track in every possible way. In this video so far, we've seen, I think, 13 city tracks, and even though some of them have been pretty good, none of them have been perfect. But Singapore Speedway is perfect. There's no other city track in this game that's so thrilling from start to finish. There are parts of this track that are more closed off, sure, but the whole thing feels so open. Anytime you get on a glider, you get to see a shot of a huge part of the city, and it just feels so grand every time. And that's especially great, considering that there are 4 glider ramps in this track. 4. The blue color scheme makes it visually distinct, the music is so amazing that it's practically become the anthem of the Booster Course Pass, and there's so much variation everywhere that I feel like it's physically impossible to not be interested, although I'm sure someone will prove me wrong. We start off in this pretty basic main area of the city, but then we immediately get shot through this giant flamboyant canyon up onto a rooftop pool. Then we glide all the way back down through these star rings, and that's just lap 1. And instead of lap 2 being all in the boring city, we just turn right instead of left, and get introduced to Chinatown. It's just a cool little area with some contrasting colors that's realistically nothing special, but is different enough to add a little something. Then we have a glider over a river with these fountains, and then the Helix Bridge immediately after. There's just something so Mario Kart and so perfect about this whole section, and even though I'm pretty sure the actual Helix Bridge doesn't have giant green and red arrows, it's still probably one of the most interesting ways of literally just turning around in the whole game. But we're still not done, because now we have the best glider part so far, where we get this absolutely huge view of just so much stuff with so many different ways to go, and ending things off by going backward through Chinatown and through the main city part is just a great resolution. City tracks are kind of a fundamentally flawed idea in this game, and even though I've tried my best to explain what I think does and doesn't work, there are still so many nuances to this honestly pretty layered idea that I don't know if I could ever fully figure out what makes one perfect, but hey, Singapore Speedway has gotta be a good blueprint, a good place to start, because it is hands down the best track in the Booster Course Pass, except for all of the ones we haven't done yet. There's still a couple more left. DK Jungle is one of the most infectiously fun things ever, and I'm not sure if I only think that because of all of the Donkey Kong Country Returns references, but whatever the reason, I still really like it. Even if the track didn't have fantastic track design, fantastic graphics, fantastic basically everything, I'd still probably rank it way higher than I realistically should. When I see these tiki guys, I am happy. When I see the big bouncy flower, I am happy. When I see these giant screaming pillars, I am happy. When I hear the remix of DK Jungle Groove, you guessed it, I am happy. Oddly enough, I am not happy when I see the giant banana temple. Don't get me wrong, it looks great. It's an awesome centerpiece to the course. These little platforms that you speed boost between to get there are really fun. There's the great banana. But like probably 95% of all kids who grew up with Donkey Kong Country Returns, I never collected every single Kong letter in every single world to unlock the secret Golden Temple level. I never even made it past like World 4. So by the time I found out about the Golden Temple level like 5 or 6 years later, I had already played this track like 100 times and fully cemented my opinion on it. And I kinda wish that they explored a couple more of the worlds besides Jungle, because if they had already committed to putting the last world in the game here, why not throw in a couple parts from like Ruins or Factory or Cliff? That's just a nitpick though. What we got is still amazing, and even though my headcanon that we were gonna get another Donkey Kong Country track in Wave 6, hinting toward a third Returns game finally, has now been absolutely shattered and my life is ruined, that doesn't really detract from how much fun this track is, both as fan service and as an actual course. Thank God they finally added Diddy to the game. Although I do have a new headcanon now that we're gonna get a new Returns game next year. I need one of these headcanons to keep me sane. We haven't had a new one of these in like a decade. DS Mario Circuit is one of the best tracks in the Booster Course Pass, and I know I'm probably the only person in the whole world who thinks that, but I absolutely love this track. This is one of the only courses, maybe the only course, where I think a lower level of graphics actually helps. The bright and absolutely unobstructed blue and green colors makes this oceanside kingdom look absolutely beautiful, and right in the middle they throw in this darker forest area, and the whole thing just feels so cool. There are so many unique obstacles in this track, like these piranha plants that breathe fire, and this wiggler that comes out and walks around on the third lap. Everything from the electronic and catchy music to these trees that look like giant bunches of grapes, combined to feel like something straight out of a Mario game. There really isn't much I can say to justify why I love this track so much. I always just have so much fun just looking at the scenery, listening to the music, and just feeling so good about myself as I swerve around these turns on this surprisingly intricate layout. 4 out of the only 7 tracks after this realistically aren't even anything special, a lot like this one, but just feel the most like what Mario Kart really means to me, and DS Mario Circuit, despite being so new, has already joined those in my mind and certified itself as one of my favorite tracks in the whole game. Big Blue is not one I have any emotional attachment to, but it's just so awesome that how could I not put it in the top 7? Every lap is completely different, but somehow the whole thing just builds and builds the whole time. In this game, it can be really difficult to notice anti-gravity unless you're actually looking for it, but here, it's honestly really hard not to. All of the changes are really subtle, but when you look up and see that the ceiling is ocean, it's never not awesome. This river section through the canyon is not only great because of the variety it adds to the track, but also because of the huge shortcuts that Nintendo decided not to patch out of existence before the game was even out. The last lap is just these blue and purple pathways, but combined with the music and the fact that you're driving straight up and on some level you know it, keeps things exciting to the very end. Once again, what do you even want me to say? It's not even like Big Blue is one of my favorites at all, but the power behind it legitimately is enough to raise it up to S tier. Just because of the attention this track commands at all times, I really don't think a single person can possibly hate it. The top 3 tracks, as well as the next one, like I said before, aren't realistically the best, and are just the ones that fill me with, indescribable emotions and reach into my soul and perfectly sum up exactly what I could want out of a Mario Kart track. So, let's see one of those right now. When I played Daisy Circuit for the first time, I thought it was sort of dumb. 2 fountains in a row? That has to be one of the stupidest layout decisions I've ever seen. Until I realized that the first fountain was of Luigi and Daisy dancing, and the second fountain was of baby Luigi and baby Daisy dancing. That one wholesome detail was the start of my character arc of realizing that I kind of love this track now. I mean, it's still way too early to tell, it's only like a month old, but it certainly has all of the components of a track that summarizes what Mario Kart means to me. The setting of this colorful town by the ocean at sunset is executed so well, and I don't really think that the tunnel section detracts from the feeling at all. Of course, a road that goes out to sea and then turns straight back around is ridiculous, but chaining all of those speed boosts together absolutely makes it worth it. I'm glad that they weren't afraid to change the music from something more exciting to something more relaxing and more fitting of what this version of the track was going for. The flute and piano work together so damn well to make one of the most peaceful experiences in the entire game, Every single time I play this track, I find something new that endears me to it just a little bit more. And even though I can't officially say yet that this is one of my very favorite Mario Kart 8 tracks that perfectly sums up what the magic of this game can accomplish, I mean, I can't exactly imagine anything that'll change my mind. Anyway, the next two are technically the best in the game, and the next one is the best track in the whole Booster Course Pass, and then the three after that are the ones that are just my favorite. Point is, the next one is the only track in the whole Booster Course Pass that can surpass Daisy Circuit. At least for now. I make no promises in the future. This one could end up being like the best one in the whole game. Who knows? But what is this next one? It's a trick question. You already know what it is. You've known from the beginning. Wii Rainbow Road is good, and everyone knows it. Despite 2 years of hype for it, it still managed to surpass my expectations. This is a faithful adaptation that knows exactly what made the original so perfect, and was determined to actually keep those things. It's weird, but it's almost like a lot of these new tracks could have used something like that, especially one in particular. So interesting. This one looks just so beautiful. I didn't truly believe that 3DS Rainbow Road was too blue until I saw this, and now that I know what a slightly transparent road with shooting stars embedded inside of it looks like in full rainbow, I don't think I can go back. It should come to no one's surprise that yet again, the first thing I thought when I played this track for the first time was, wow, that's a nice floor. One complaint that I don't get is that the track is too long, because for one, not a single part of it repeats, so it's not like it's that boring. Every single area presents a different challenge, and if it just being slightly longer makes it boring for you, that might just be a YouTube Shorts attention span sort of thing. And also, if the grand finale to a Mario Kart game triple the size of any other, spanning an entire decade, was just like the same length as the rest of the tracks, that wouldn't really feel right, would it? No, this track knows exactly what it's trying to be. For like the 5th time now, and the final time, thank God, I'll reiterate what I view as the perfect Rainbow Road. Either you can make it a challenging final gauntlet, or you can make it a chill, relaxing, nostalgic time that makes you reminisce about your adventures. We've seen Rainbow Roads that have succeeded at being a gauntlet, and ones that have succeeded at being a finale. But never one that succeeded at both. And until Wave 6 came out, after I wrote the entire script, I didn't even think it was possible. This is the last part of the script that I wrote and recorded for this video, and so for the whole thing, I never realized that it was even a possibility for something like this to happen. But the first time I played this track, marveling at the floor, getting shot through the star tunnel, listening to the music, falling off the road and hurtling back down to earth in a ball of fire, I knew that this was the track that everyone was looking for, and more. What a fantastic way to end off Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Emphasis on end. If Booster Course Pass 2 comes out, the people will riot, blood will fill the streets, and Nintendo HQ will be burned to the ground. Anyway, really good track. And the next one is sort of the best. Not Wario, I hardly know him. Everybody knows how solid this track is from start to finish. It's the crowning achievement of this game, and what Nintendo should be most proud of when they look back. Big Blue commands attention without really being one of my very favorites, but this course does all of that and more. The slow build-up that I just complimented Big Blue for is done so much better here. Everything is perfect. It's like an 11 or 12 out of 10. The whole track is on a downward slope, and the music changes and adds to the suspense with every new area, and so the whole time we know that eventually that downward slope is gonna end, and it's gonna be awesome. We start in this icy area, which is pretty cool, no pun intended. Well, some pun intended, I don't know. We're introduced to the music, and it's a nice way to start the track, but immediately we're thrown into another area, and our expectations for what this track even is are completely subverted when the whole second lap is set inside a giant dark and industrial factory. The music changes to fit that idea, and so now we're in this giant cave with rushing water, a giant control room area, inside of a dam, only to come out into a forest where we have to dodge falling trees and we can barely even tell where we're going. We're moving so fast that everything feels as intense as it's ever been, as the violinists are having a seizure on their instruments. And even though lap 3 is the most basic, it's still the culmination of everything we've seen so far. A giant ski slope with the music building all the while in the background, only to reach its climax as the ground falls away below us, and now we're gliding down, the end is in sight, the crowd is cheering, and the only thing left to do is a mad dash to the finish. 8-Bit Music Theory has a great video on how the music in this track changes, but you can probably tell anyway just how great this all really is. If you've played it before, you know it's the best, and I realize I've just wasted 2 minutes talking about it, because everything I've said, everyone already knows. Since it focuses more on being the most epic thing ever than being something that touches the very soul of a few specific people, it was never going to be my absolute favorite, but without a doubt, Mount Wario is the best track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. But what's cool about this being a sort of subjective ranking is, we still have 3 more. Thwomp Ruins is the most unexpectedly charming thing ever. Before I actually sat down to think about it, I never would have guessed that a track from the Mushroom Cup would end up in the top 3, but here we are. The theme of a ruined kingdom in the sky is used to its fullest here, with every part of the track feeling distinct. Wait a minute, is this one castle in the sky? Hold on a minute. Anyway, anti-gravity is actually used well here, because instead of a giant glowing blue wall like on Toad's Turnpike, the warping of gravity almost feels natural in this ethereal place, isolated from the rest of the world where the rocks are sentient and move on their own. And even if the Thwomps weren't here, I'd still be impressed how dynamic the track design manages to be. On the first lap in this cave area, you can just drive through it as is. On the second lap though, boulders start to fall from the ceiling and roll down the center of the road. And by the third lap, those boulders have opened up an entirely new path that lets you save a lot of time on the next area with the risk of being smashed. Base 8 graphics are doing everything in their power to make this course as amazing looking as possible. If this was a track in the Booster Course Pass, a place where any details beyond individual stones doesn't exist, you wouldn't even be able to tell that this place was supposed to be ruined at all. But here, the amount of weathering and vegetation that's covering everything makes you feel like you're actually there. The grass in this first area makes Toad Circuit's grass look like a toddler's finger painting, and the music just makes the track 100 to 1,000 to maybe 1,000,000 times better. I haven't done the math yet, but, it's somewhere in there. The second best song in the whole game, and one that fits this track perfectly. If you've only ever listened to this song while actually playing the course, I encourage you to listen to it on its own, not in the background, just with your headphones on and nothing obscuring it. The way this first part of the song sounds is honestly super weird and kind of off-putting. In the words of a YouTube commenter, it kind of sounds clunky like a thwomp. If you look at the sheet music, the amount of triplets everywhere should give you a pretty good idea of how weird this song really is. There are some chords in there that when I plugged them into a chord finder, it literally told me they did not exist because they were that strange. But it's all just in the background. We get introduced to the main melody and the track goes on. But then all of a sudden, around when we leave this second cave and enter the open again, we get this grand sweeping melody. And I'm convinced that the biggest reason I love this track so much is the feeling of hitting that shortcut, gliding over this huge area at the end of the lap, being able to see everything, and hearing the music finally come together. In fact, all 3 of these last tracks have moments like this, where the music hits its climax and it just really hits you how perfect the course you're driving on really is. Moments like this sum up what Mario Kart really means to so many people, and I'm absolutely one of them. And that's why I know for a fact that there's at least one other person out there, hopefully, who loves Thwomp Ruins just as much as I do. I mean, how can there not be when it's just this great? Toad Harbor was always my very favorite track when I was younger, and the fact that after all these years it's only been knocked down 1 spot speaks volumes about the pure perfection that is this course. The perfect depiction of what people who only have a vague knowledge of America think America is like. This track is so much more than just a harbor, and it shows. There's so much life infused into every part of the layout, and you can see that from the very start. Pretty much everywhere, you have the option to go one of 2 ways, and it gives the whole thing this super infectious sense of freedom, like you can do whatever you want. You can jump across these boats here, or you can stay on the main path. You can drive across the ceilings of these colored stalls and risk falling, or stay underneath and avoid the wooden posts and boxes. Although, let's be honest, everyone goes up here. You can drive around these few pretty basic turns, or you can go up this side area and plow straight through this gated community, which is what I always do. Then you can either go up onto this colorful anti-gravity area, or stay on the ground, which is probably faster but has these trains. And then the end is just a free-for-all. Do whatever you want. The freedom you've been given so far now gets tripled as everyone races down this huge hill. There are trains everywhere, like in the last part. There are speed boosts everywhere, like in the first part. And to top it all off, at the end, there's this little secret area off to the left. That's what's so impressive about Mario Kart. When a track is great, you can feel like you're there, and that's something Toad Harbor pulls off just so well. I mean, with the nostalgic and impossibly Nintendo-sounding music, the details on all of these houses that make the city unique, the feeling of flying into the air on one of these speed boosts and feeling like you can do anything, no wonder child me loved this track so much, and my opinion on it hasn't really changed since. Well, except for one thing. There's one track that I now realize is even better. Wild Woods is probably my favorite thing in any video game. Saying that there are no issues with this course doesn't do this masterpiece justice, because there's more to making something fantastic than just filling out a checklist. I love when Howard Ashman was writing the music and lyrics for the songs in Beauty and the Beast, and just scribbled down the first thing that came to mind and checked off a box, because as long as it's there, it's fine. No, that didn't f***ing happen. I still think that Mount Wario is realistically better, but to be honest, this track can give it a serious run for its money in basically every category. Instead of the theme being a forest, Nintendo says, you know what, screw that. Let's just make the whole thing surrounding one giant tree, and it's gotta be one of the most magical environments in the whole game. The bluish-green light filtering through the canopy gives everything these super beautiful and calming colors, and that's just the least of it. Every single part of this track is just as insane as the last, which says a lot considering that the whole thing starts in anti-gravity, going straight up the tree trunk. The road splits into branches, and you can see this wooden platform at the end with the start of a little Shy Guy settlement, only for an entire treehouse civilization to be revealed when you turn the corner. With rope bridges everywhere, Shy Guys going about their daily life, just so much in every little corner that you feel like you could explore for hours. Then you drive down a waterfall inside of a hollowed out log, and then the music hits its climax as you jump from lily pad to lily pad with the entire tree spread out before you. There are so many details that add so much, like this little vine elevator at the start, or the little birds that fly by, or literally any of this treehouse area. Mount Wario is just objectively grand, and I don't really need to explain how I came to that conclusion, but literally just by looking at the intro for this track, you can come to pretty much the exact same conclusion. Wild Woods is just as breathtaking, if not more so, and this has the best song in the game to go along with it. Yeah, it's not even close. It's the only song in the game in 5/4, which means it has 5 quarter notes per measure instead of 4, which is the time signature of every other song in this game except Peach Gardens and one other one, which I already forgot what it was. It takes the combination of a clarinet and a piccolo, Squidward and SpongeBob, and makes this absolutely beautiful song with an ending that just builds and builds into probably my favorite moment in the entire game. Every so often, I'll just watch the video of the official recording on YouTube for no other reason than that I just want to listen to the song again. Realistically, Mount Wario probably is the best track in this game, like I've said before. But even though Wild Woods isn't number one in like every category, it's by far the most consistently great visually, graphically, thematically, detailedly, musically, nostalgically, and emotionally. It's just so perfect in literally every single possible way, taking almost every criticism I've had with any of the tracks in this video and absolutely knocking it out of the park. That this honestly was one of the easiest spots to rank in this whole video. Wild Woods is far and away my absolute favorite track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and I knew from the start that the Booster Course Pass wasn't gonna do a damn thing to change that. Well, that took quite a while. This video has been in some stage of development pretty much since the Booster Course Pass started, which is basically pretty much since my channel started, and I'm not gonna let all of that hard work go to waste, which is why I'm gonna use this ranking to rank a bunch of other stuff about the game. Let me show you what I mean. With this ranking, we can take something like the Mushroom Cup, add up the number each of the tracks ended up being in the ranking together, then divide by 4 to find the average, and now we have the Mushroom Cup's average worth. If we do this for every cup, we can actually rank the cups from worst to best, with more points meaning worse and less points meaning better, just like before. That gives us something like this, and don't worry, I'll put this graphic back on the screen at the end. So let's take a look at this. The Turnip Cup comes in dead last, with an average spot of 76.75 out of 96, which is insanely impressive and also exactly what I expected from the very beginning. Then the Golden Dash Cup, which again, kind of expected since this was the very start of the DLC when Nintendo wasn't exactly trying. Next is the Rock Cup, and then the Propeller Cup, both of which were brought down by one track that really sucked, or in the case of the Rock Cup, multiple tracks that really sucked. Then the Special Cup, which is pretty disappointing, but not unsurprising. Then a tie between the Triforce Cup, with a pretty bland middle half, and the Lucky Cat Cup, with a pretty bland first and third track. If I had to pick one over the other, I'd pick the Lucky Cat Cup, but I don't really know. The Mushroom Cup is next, followed by the Leaf Cup. Next is the Feather Cup, which actually surprised me a lot because I think that this cup is actually pretty good. So I guess the barrier between the okay cups and the good ones is probably around here. Then the Fruit Cup, which got royally screwed over by DK Summit. And then the Lightning Cup, which got royally screwed over by Piranha Plant Slide. Then the Moon Cup, which has all good tracks, but I guess not good enough to get any higher, so I guess the boundary between the good and the great tracks is probably around here. And then the Flower Cup, which definitely does have a bad track, but also has an amazing one to compensate. The Egg Cup is next, then the Shell Cup, which is definitely higher than I expected, then the Cherry Cup, and then the Crossing Cup, which had the potential to be utterly transcendent if it wasn't for Baby Park, then the Star Cup, which is somehow only in 6th place despite being literally one spot away from being all A tiers and above. This game is so good that this cup that's considered one of the best ever couldn't even break the top 5 for me, and I don't even think it's bad. I like it a lot. So what can break the top 5 then? Both Wave 6 cups, for one. The Spiny Cup is next, despite Rosalina's Ice World, and then the Banana Cup, although I get that this one's a bit more controversial. Then the Boomerang Cup in 3rd, again, not surprising. Then a huge jump up, the Bell Cup in 2nd, and by literally one placement, just barely being the best cup in all of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, is the Acorn Cup. 1 A- tier track, 2 A tier tracks, and an S tier track. A level of perfection that took 10 years to reach. But, you know, we could have had better. So many cups in this game averaged out to a so much lower overall spot because of one bad apple. And speaking of apples, the Fruit Cup is a perfect example of this. Like, what if in an alternate universe, the Fruit Cup only had 3 tracks, and DK Summit was erased from humanity's collective consciousness? Well, then it would catapult from 14th place all the way up to 5th. And this isn't the only cup with something like this. The Lightning Cup without Piranha Plant Slide would be tied for 4th with the Banana Cup. The Egg Cup without Excite Bike Arena would end up in 3rd, and the Crossing Cup without Baby Park would go all the way up to 1st, with an average spot of 20.67. But we're still not done. The Spiny Cup without Rosalina's Ice World surpasses even that, with an average spot of 17.67, and the Boomerang Cup without Waluigi Stadium has an average spot of 14. That's literally insane. But we can also rank some other stuff, like were the Nitro or Retro tracks better in this game on average? Well, the Retro tracks have a final score of 50.03, and the Nitro tracks have a final score of 44.79, which is not unexpected since the Booster Course Pass was pretty much all Retro tracks, and their whole first half of them were not the best. And speaking of that, how did the Booster Course Pass compare to the base game? And how did the original DLC from 2016 compare to both of those? Well, here are the numbers, and just like I assumed, the Booster Course Pass is by far the worst, and the original DLC is pretty comfortably the best. We can also find out which wave of the Booster Course Pass was the best. Just keep in mind that these numbers will be out of 48 instead of 96. Here are those numbers. I'm not going to go through all of these one by one, you guys can read, hopefully. I was kind of rooting for Wave 5, but it's a pretty good sign of Wave 4's quality when not even DK Summit could stop it from securing 2nd place. Wave 2 is in a league of its own at the bottom, and Wave 6 is in a league of its own at the top. Nothing too surprising here, to be honest. And finally, which game had the best retro tracks? Well, once again, the numbers are on screen, and this was honestly a huge shock to me. Super Mario Kart isn't at the very bottom, which is solely because of Bowser Castle 3, and I know that because I ran it again without Bowser Castle 3, and it was at the very bottom. Instead, Mario Kart 7 is the one at the bottom. Double Dash is surprisingly low, but then I realized that DK Mountain and Yoshi Circuit are the only ones that made it, like, even past B tier. Tour is way higher up than I thought, and I'm glad that the insane Super Circuit remakes managed to pay off in that game's final ranking, despite that one track that people don't like. The only thing that makes sense here is Wii being the best. It was pretty close between the bottom 4, honestly, and same with the top 3. Who would have guessed that Mario Kart Tour, the cursed mobile game that caused this whole thing in the first place, would be the most average part of the entire thing? The math doesn't lie, though. Alright, now that's pretty much all I have to say. Just like how Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is a game that needs no introduction, it doesn't really need any outroduction either. Not that that's a word, but still. How am I supposed to sum up what one of the best games in recent memory truly means to me and to so many other people when it took me 3 hours just to get this far? But if there's one thing I feel like I should mention, it's that just because this game is great doesn't mean it has to go on for any longer. Saying that it's so amazing that it should just keep going is not sustainable. Have you heard of Marvel and or Star Wars and or anything currently owned by Disney? And we've seen that Nintendo is still capable of making something amazing whenever they try. And with the amount of money this franchise is worth, I'm pretty confident they'll try with this next game. And you know, I'll be there to play it. Thanks for watching. Make a new Donkey Kong Country game, you cowards. It's been like 10 years.